you an opportunity to answer them, but please don't interrupt me during my time.
With pleasure.
Okay, I know I'm a woman, but please try to limit yourself to answering my questions. No, I'm sorry, but we get talked over all the time, and I don't want that to happen at this hearing.
I would remind members, the gentlelady is recognized. Please proceed.
Thank you. The time is mine. Clothing is going up 20%. Shoe prices and canned goods like chicken noodle soup and canned fruit and microwave meals have gone up 15%. Toys are getting more expensive. Walmart just raised the prices of dinosaur action figures by 38% and baby-born dolls by 43%. Household goods like drills, toolkits, vacuums have also gone trade deal with China is probably not worth the paper that it's written on, because this is China's China's track record. These are facts. In the Trump administration's phase 1 trade deal, China promised to increase purchases of U.S. goods and services by $200 billion over 2 years. Countless reports and you yourself have noted that China has failed to meet these purchase commitments. Those were purchase commitments that were negotiated by Trump in his first administration.
They met their agreements under President Trump in 2020, and President Biden did not enforce them, and the Chinese delegation told me that they did not believe they needed to adhere to them.
I'm reclaiming my time. That's incorrect. China has also not made the structural reforms that they promised Trump that they would. Many U.S. companies still reported widespread intellectual property theft and counterfeiting. So excuse me if the last attempt by the Trump administration to secure meaningful change from China doesn't exactly inspire any confidence in the current negotiations. And, you know, quite frankly, negotiating trade agreements with China requires more time and effort than this administration has given so far. And that's why I was alarmed to hear this morning that Trump said that the U.S.-China deal was done after just 2 days of talks in London. Mr. Secretary, the press release on this so-called deal looks more like a framework. Congress, who has the constitutional authority over trade, needs the details of this supposed deal. So I'm asking if you will provide this committee with the actual details of this deal, because there has been, unlike what was said earlier, there has been no consultation with our side of the aisle, at least, on the China negotiation. Will you commit to giving us the specifics of that deal, the details?
Congresswoman, I flew back at 4 a.m. this morning to be here this morning, and we are—
It's a simple yes or no question.
No, it is not a simple yes or no question. We are in the midst of constructing it, and back to your question, China has proven an unreliable partner in strategic—
Will you commit to consulting with us on trade deal with China?
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I would ask the witness be allowed to answer that last question.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
It's a yes or no question. It's very simple.
Representative, I raised many of your concerns to the Chinese delegation, and it will be a longer process. The trade deal today, or last night, was for a specific goal, and it will be a much longer process. And I will note that the previous administration did nothing.
But excuse me, the question was whether or not you would consult with members of Congress.
Mr. Arrington's time.
It's my time now.
Mr. Arrington's time, 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service. I think my best contribution now in 5 minutes is to separate.
We were listening to Representative Jody Arrington from Texas, Republican member.
Tired, old, baseless, and false claims from my Democrat colleagues. Let's start with Ms. Sanchez and her claim that they didn't pass the tax bill. That's not wrong. That is completely false. The Inflation Reduction Act was a tax and spending bill. They levied taxes on corporations. They increased taxes on stock buybacks. It was a tax and spend bill. We marked it up in the tax committee. What you won't find, though, Mr. Secretary, is a tax increase on the billionaires. You won't find a tax increase in their tax bill on millionaires. They didn't raise the tax rate for the top 10%, the top 20%, the top 30%. They didn't raise taxes on their millionaire. They didn't create the wealth tax that they're going to criticize us for. In fact, we're preventing all marginal rates from increasing by extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and including the top rate from going to 39% from 37. They didn't increase it from 37 to 39%. They had total Democrat control, and they didn't do it. Feign indignation is what that is. Now, let's go through some more facts. If we don't pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because they're successful in stopping it, there'll be a 22% on average tax increase for all Americans. Is that true or false?
True.
They'll lose about $5,000, $6,000, the median household income. They'll lose about $5,000, $6,000 of their family budget. True or false?
At least that amount.
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Did the top 10%, did the top 1% pay a greater share of taxes after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
A much higher percentage, sir.
Did the top 1% that paid 38% of the entire cost of the federal government actually, after TCJA, pay a higher percentage of the cost of the federal government, going from 38% to 45%? True or false?
Yes, sir. 7% more.
And the top 10% was paying 70%. Top 10% earners in this country pay 70% of the freight of the federal government. After the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they are now paying 75%. Is that true or false?
It is correct.
So another false claim during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passage was that this was a tax cut for the rich and for corporations. Is it true or false that the Washington Post gave the Democrats 4 Pinocchios, saying 3 out of $4 in the tax cuts benefited individuals, not corporations?
I don't read the Washington Post.
Well, they gave 4 Pinocchios. Even the Washington Post could not tolerate that misleading and false claim. The bottom 10% wages grew twice as fast as the top 10. True or false after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, sir. And household net worth increased substantially faster for the bottom 50.
True or false? Did the poverty rate sink to an all-time record low after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, sir.
Did we have the lowest unemployment rate among minorities and women after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Yes, sir.
How can these things be true and what they're saying true, Mr. Secretary?
I will leave that to
the American people.
the American
because
people.
This is empirical data.
Who had a referendum on November 5th.
They sure did. And this is empirical data. These are verifiable facts. Now, let's move to this notion. I got a minute left, that somehow we've increased the national debt in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Forget for a minute that they, under their control, full Democrat control, added $8 trillion, and under President Biden, $8 trillion to the national debt. 40-year inflation, soaring interest, all because of their failed economic policies, paying people not to work, expanding welfare without work requirements, taxes, barrage of regulation, record regulatory cost on small businesses, and the list goes on, okay? And we've all suffered, especially working people. As you said, it was a regressive tax, that 20+% increase in the cost of essential goods and services. But if you take CBO's static scores, the cost of the bill is about $4.16 trillion. If you take the $1.7 trillion in savings, the largest spending reduction in the history of the United States by twofold, and you put a conservative growth rate, because CBO's growth rate is 1.8 in their baseline. That 1.8 is based on the last 4 years of failed economic policies and unbridled spending. It's not based on the policies embedded in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. President Trump grew the GDP by 1 percentage point from 1.8 to 2.8. Even Joe Biden had an annual average of 2.7. We put 2.6 in there as an assumption, which yields $2.6 trillion. The net effect is we reduced the deficit, and then some.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate you being here. God bless America, and go West Texas.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Sewell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, listen to Representative Terry Sewell from Alabama, a Democrat.
I actually, with all due respect, only get 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask, my constituents have sent me a list of questions that they just want yes or no answers to. And out of respect for the time and the fact that they want some clarity, I hope that you'll just say yes or no. The first question is, will the big, beautiful bill add to the national debt? Yes or no? Is that a yes or a no? That's a no? Yes?
Sorry?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
It remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, look, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office official score of this bill says that it increases the federal deficit by $2.4 trillion.
Sorry to interrupt, Congresswoman, but the CBO also said that tariff income over the 10-year window would be $2.8 trillion.
You know,
so that would be
you want to talk about
$400 billion.
dynamics, scoring, and all that
There's
stuff.
nothing dynamic about that. You're quoting the CBO. I'm quoting the CBO. So let's level set.
We can level set, but the reality is that I have constituents back home who are really scared. They're scared that prices have gone up. This administration has promised that prices will go down. That's absolutely has not occurred for them. And every time they hear the word tariff, they think of the fact that it's another tax on them that will be passed on to them for goods and services. At any rate, not only did the CBOs say that this bill will increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget said $2.5 trillion. The Yale Budget Lab, $2.4 trillion. The point I'm trying to make is that you will add to the national debt over the span of this time. The second question that they wanted me to ask is, will all Americans have a net benefit from this beautiful big bill?
It is it's difficult to.
Yes or no?
Again, it's impossible to say all Americans. It is ridiculous for me to give an answer for 337 million.
Well, I can tell you what a lot of
I can say the balance of probability is that Americans will get a substantial increase, especially if you're referring to working people in your district.
Yep.
They should do very well, as they did in 2018 and 2019.
Tables tell us? You know, the distribution the numbers don't lie. The average tax cut in 2027 for people in this bill making $1 million is about $81,500. So someone who makes $1 million, and no one in my district makes $1 million, to my knowledge, will get a tax increase, will get a tax benefit of $81,000. That's $223 a day. Now, the average tax rate in 2027 for people making under $50,000, which in my district is about 63% of the people that I represent, they will only get a tax break or tax increase of $265, which is 73 cents per day. That's pittance. When you think about the fact that the IRS, which this administration has decimated, closing field offices everywhere, laying off or dismissing thousands of workers from the IRS. The folks in my district often get, bombarded with inquiries about their earned income tax credits, and billionaires that are going to get $81,500 more don't. So, I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is that not all Americans will benefit the same. We know that because people make different things. But the fact of the matter is, if you're only saving me $268 and you're taking away my health care, which 16 million Americans will have no health care, will lose their health care, and they have to lose their health care in order for you guys to actually pay for your bill. I mean, to pay for your bill by kicking people off health insurance and giving them no health care, to me, is immoral and not fair. The last question that I was asked to ask you was, when will we hit the debt ceiling? I know that this big, beautiful bill also means a increase in the debt ceiling. And frankly, I heard you say that that is something that's an imperative. I would agree with that. When do we foresee us hitting the debt ceiling?
Congresswoman, I want to congratulate you. You have a very sophisticated constituency to ask questions like this. That the so-called X date is a... With
all due respect, just because you're poor doesn't mean you're ignorant.
As I said, very sophisticated.
Yeah.
It was
can you answer the question?
I'm in the habit of
I'd like to know whether or not
of saying thank you to compliments. That the so-called X date is a moving target.
So when do you you're the Secretary of Treasury, so tell me, when do you predict Given where we are right
It will
now,
be
will we hit the ceiling?
some point in the middle to late summer.
Is that August, July?
Again, it is imprecise.
Well, sir, I just think that it is an abomination that we are actually giving bigger tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans who don't need a tax cut.
The gentleman's time has
Meanwhile, we're
expired.
taking away food assistance and health care from people who desperately need it.
Gentlewoman's time
Thank you,
has
and I yield
expired.
back.
I now recognize Mr. Estes for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Secretary
We're now
Vicente.
listening
Thank
to
you for
Ron
being here. I
Estes,
know you,
Republican member
been
from the
very busy
state
in the last
of
few days,
Kansas.
and appreciate you coming back with struggling through the jet lag that you're obviously feeling. I just want to. I have some remarks here. I just want to throw out a couple of comments that have been talked about. I mean, and I believe you mentioned this earlier, is that after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% went from paying only 40% of the tax burden to now paying over 46% of the tax burden. So as we've put in this good Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% are actually paying more. And I know a lot of questions from the other side of the aisle talked a lot about the deficit. And as you mentioned in your earlier remarks, the country's been fairly consistent in maintaining tax revenue at about a 17 to 18% of GDP. Unfortunately, the problem we're dealing with now is spending has ballooned up to roughly 23% or 24% of GDP, which is creating that problem that we have an imbalance. So I have several things I want to cover. First, I want to talk a little bit about Section 899. It's a common sense provision that's based on two bills that Chairman Smith and I introduced. It's not new. It's not revenge, as some in the media have been proclaiming and wailing about the last few weeks. It's a reasonable approach to make sure that foreign countries don't pilfer the U.S. Treasury with UTPRs or DSTs. And the fact is, if we do nothing, we're ceding our tax authority to other countries. And the JCT is warning us that we will lose $122 billion in tax revenue over the next 10 years. Ways and Means could have responded with much more severity in terms of the bill that we looked at. We took a measured approach that maintains our tax sovereignty and that either discourages our allies from moving forward with these discriminatory taxes, or will raise our tax revenues by $116 billion over the next 10 years. I'd like to submit, Mr. Chairman, for the record, an op-ed from Bloomberg that covered this topic. Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Secretary Vicente, are the fears that Wall Street has over the 899 grounded in truth, and what's behind the stir, and why wasn't there outcry from the Wall Street and economists during the last administration working with OECD in a manner that put America last?
Sir, I believe that there is quite a bit of misinformation on 899, and I also believe that if businesses came back, took a deep breath, and much of the pushback is coming from overseas companies, and overseas companies are worried that their countries may try to usurp U.S. authority. So if a European country, they tried to unfairly tax a U.S. company or take money away from the U.S. Treasury, then it would fall perhaps on that corporate. So they should look to their own capitals. This is a fiscal bill, not a revenge bill.
Right, I agree with that. I think that some of these companies need to be lobbying their own government instead of trying to lobby
100%, Congressman.
Administration. Something else that I've been pushing over the last 6 years has been research and development expensing. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this Washington Examiner op-ed titled "We're a Nation of Innovators, but our tax code no longer encourages it."
Without objection, so ordered.
Immediate expensing for research and development is a jobs provision, with 3/4 of the R&D expending spent on wages and salaries. Also has broad bipartisan support. I believe we need to provide businesses with certainty by making immediate write-off permanent, because it takes longer than 4 years to actually develop more new methods and technologies. Secretary, can you help explain why it's critical for our country to return to immediate R&D expensing, hopefully on a permanent basis as we finish this bill?
Sir, we are the undisputed technological leader in the world, from AI to life sciences. And one of the reasons for that has been the expensing of R&D. And we are pushing very hard to make this the best location for whether it is high-tech investing, whether it is biomedicine, or any other, the manufacturing process that we want to bring back. Part of the problem, I believe, is that the manufacturing process has been separated from the R&D process. So we need to have both of them here sitting side by side in the United States.
Yes, thank you. And there's so many other provisions I could do, but I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Del Bene is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here.
Susan Del Bene, Democratic member from the state of Washington.
Support the government having a consolidated database containing Americans' sensitive financial, health, and personal information?
I support protecting Americans.
Do you support the consolidated database?
I support protecting Americans' personal
So
information based on current law.
I think it's very concerning that you're not able to say no. This is not a partisan question. In fact, just last week, Republican Representative Warren Davidson responded to reports that DOJ is merging huge sets of data from across federal agencies into a centralized repository. He said it's dangerous when you start combining all those data points on an individual into one database. It's a power that history says will eventually be abused, end quote. Well, I could not agree more, and would also add that this kind of database would be a gold mine for malicious actors who are eager to exploit American sensitive data. And Mr. Secretary, Section 6103 sets forth the confidentiality and disclosure rules for tax returns and tax information. Just because DOJ wants to compile people's sensitive information into one place doesn't mean the confidentiality rules go away. Is that correct?
We adhere to 6103.
So it seems like, you know, that should be a simple one too. We should absolutely be clear that the confidentiality rules did not go away. In fact, earlier in this hearing, you asserted that the Treasury Department is following, I think you said, the proper provisions within the Privacy Act, all proper provisions within the Privacy Act and Section 6103. So my question for you is, how can we be sure that's happening? I mean, especially knowing that the president illegally fired 18 inspectors general, including acting Treasury IG Sherba. How do we know? I'm sorry, you saying that isn't good enough. We're an oversight body. How do we know?
Again, I will say that we are following the law,
But we need, that's not good enough, Mr. Secretary. You should be coming. We should have officials within Treasury coming. We should, and this is a statement to my colleagues on the other.
I'm here today.
But you're not answering how we know that. You're just saying we are. So
what would an acceptable answer
let's bring people who are building a database. Let's go through the details of exactly what you are doing with that data, what protections are in place. We should have hearings doing that. In fact, we requested hearings on this from our partners on the other side of the aisle, refused to bring people from DOJ, et cetera, into this committee so we can be sure that, a consolidated database.
A judge in the Southern District of New York has ruled that all of our protocols are.
Mr. Secretary, we are a co-equal branch of government. We are the oversight body.
Well,
I asked that question because it is part of my job not to have you just say it. It's okay.
And a judge's
then
word,
let's
I'm
look
not
at
sure
it.
how to satisfy.
I think because we actually have the authority to get that detail. We are oversight. We are not just here to have you say, don't worry about it. We're here to get detail. And I want you to be clear that it helps. This is a risk to the American people. This is sensitive personal information. There is no clarity on how this is being protected. Early on in this administration, people are given access to information with no controls. We have not had folks come into hearings That's not good enough, Mr. Secretary, and I'm supportive of making sure that we are using technology in smart ways. I'm also very supportive of making sure that we are protecting people's personal information and we are following the law. 6103 is clear, and there is no, and now this consolidation, there's no approval on how this consolidation takes place, and you can't even be clear to me that you're about where you stand in terms of making that happening. So I don't think we're getting the information.
Maybe it did not filter up to you, but we provided a staff level briefing several weeks ago.
Then let's bring folks, I want to ask the questions, frankly. It's not about whether or not you had a staff level briefing. Let's bring experts to answer detailed questions in this body so that we get those answers. You know, I have a technology background. I'm happy to have those detailed conversations of exactly who's given access, how that access is given, and how we are making sure that information is protected. We absolutely have to make sure that there are no violations, that there are the right protocols put in place. We have no data to say that. We just have, you'd say, just trust me, it's okay. That's not good enough. And Mr. Chairman,
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Smucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you,
We're now
Secretary,
listening to
for
Lloyd
being
Smucker, Republican member from
Congratulations
Pennsylvania.
on what appears to be a great deal with China potentially, and a reset of our relationship, and a deal that'll be great for American business,
It's an
American
excellent
workers.
start, Congressman, but a start.
Yeah, I'm really continue to be proud of the work that we've done with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the impact that it had on my constituents, where average families in my district saw an increase of about $6,000 in their wages in the years following that. Inflation was low. I'll put up any day the record of the previous Trump administration with what we've seen, the disaster that we've seen in this past administration. And so grateful to have the opportunity to work with you to extend those benefits once again to every American. And we're hearing a lot from the other side here today on things that just they're falsehoods about the bill, things that are not in this bill. And I just want to remind our listeners what Democrats are voting for by voting against this bill. They will be voting for a vote against this bill is a vote for the largest tax increase in American history, a tax increase that will affect average households at every tax bracket level. They're voting for a decrease, in fact, a 50% decrease in the child tax credit, which is so important, provides important relief to every American family. They're voting for allowing Medicaid dollars to go to people who are here in the country illegally at the expense of American citizens.
Yes, sir, 1.4 million of them.
And they are voting to allow Medicaid dollars that are intended for people who really need them to go to individuals who could be working but choose not to.
They are voting for Medicaid benefits not to go to women and children as they should.
They're also voting against policies they voted for before that will be critical to grow this economy and provide additional opportunity. Policies like full expensing, they voted for that last cycle or last session. Full deductibility of R&D, full expensing. I mentioned full expensing. And then we're adding full expensing for structures, which will re-energize American manufacturing. All of the. So I want to again say that we're doing all, this is going to be beneficial to every American, and we're also doing it in a responsible way by finding savings that will drive more efficiencies in some of these programs, but will ensure that we will not add to the debt, assuming we meet very, I think, conservative estimates on growth. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir. And to go back to the CBO, the CBO produces a black box. And that black box says the growth is 1.7 or 1.8%, whether we make the TCJA permanent and continue, and that permanence causes stimulus, or, as you said, whether we have the largest tax cut in history, which would be cataclysmic, obviously, but it also assumes no change in growth. So obviously, both cannot be true.
Exactly right. So we're going to do this in a fiscal responsible way. Now, I do have one question for you, and I only have a minute left. One of the things that I was impressed with when and leading up to your appointment as secretary was your 333 plan. And particularly in the short amount of time I have, you have a stated goal at that time, at least, of getting to the deficit at being at 3% of GDP, which I know how much you're concerned about the debt. The Democrats today are raising concerns about the debt. I share those concerns. I think that's a great goal. Do you still hope to achieve that 3% debt to GDP, deficit to GDP by the end of Trump's term?
Yes, sir. It's a deficit to GDP, which the other side of the aisle doesn't seem to want to talk about, or the total debt to GDP, which Secretary Yellen and I agree on. It is those two numbers that matter. The absolute number, while daunting, those two ratios are much more important. And I said that we would like to have a 3 in front of the deficit to GDP by 2028, the end of President Trump's term, which is the long-term average.
And I think this sets,
Gentleman's time has expired.
Sets the basis for being able to achieve that. There's going to be a lot more work to do, and I look forward to working with you to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Chu for 5 minutes.
Secretary Bessent, my constituents are sick with worry
Representative
about
Judy Chu,
losing
Democrat
their
from
healthcare
California,
coverage.
questioning Treasury Secretary
The
Bessent live
nonpartisan
on
Congressional Budget Office just determined that more people will lose their coverage. 16 million people will lose their coverage as a result of this big, ugly bill, which will be the largest loss of health care coverage for people in American history. Now, Republicans are saying that this will all be accomplished by cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse. But we should not be fooled. This is accomplished by 30 different measures, including increasing the amount of red tape that people will have to go through just to stay on Medicaid and on the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA. In addition, the CBO says that this bill will cost Medicare over $500 billion. I think of the many grandmothers and grandfathers who need nursing facilities as they face various illnesses like dementia or Alzheimer's. In my district, 62% of them rely on Medicaid to get any kind of care. But this bill requires all kinds of new paperwork to stay on these programs, including paperwork for seniors seeking to dually enroll in Medicaid and Medicare. Where will these seniors go if they lose their Medicaid because they didn't file yet another form, all while having dementia? This is a life or death situation. But I guess Republicans believe, as Senator Joni Ernst said, well, we're all going to have to die. And then there is the ACA. I remember what it was like before the ACA, where people could not get health insurance if they had a pre-existing condition, like everyday conditions like asthma or even pregnancy. The ACA provided tremendous relief to millions. But this big, ugly bill will require even more red tape to stay on the ACA. It demands that 2.5 million people, like gig workers, like Uber drivers, who don't even know what they'll earn in a week accurately, estimate their income for the next year. It requires people to re-enroll year after year rather than having an automatic enrollment, which is not required by any health insurance or Medicare. It reduces enrollment periods so it can cut people off the program. And it takes away the premium tax credits that helped millions of families afford health coverage. And that is why at the hearing for this bill, I introduced an amendment to strike the provisions that undermine the coverage of the ACA. Every single Republican on this committee voted no. So Secretary Bessent, I'm asking you a question in which I only want a yes or no answer. How would you have voted on my amendment to protect the ACA and keep millions on their health insurance?
No.
Okay, that makes it clear. And Secretary Besson, I'd like to address the reason that 16 million people are going to lose their health care coverage. It's so that millionaires and billionaires can get big tax giveaways and become even richer. The nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation just this week found that if this bill becomes law, the richest 5% of taxpayers in this country will get a bigger tax cut than the bottom 80% of taxpayers combined. To put dollar amounts on it, someone earning $1 million will get a tax giveaway of $81,500 in just 1 year, while someone earning less than $50,000 can only expect $265 in 1 year, which is only 73 cents a day. That millionaire will get a tax cut in 1 day that's almost as big as what the middle-class person will get over the entire year. And of course, this does not account for the burden of paying more for basic necessities because of Trump's tariffs, nor does it account for the loss of life-saving benefits like Medicaid coverage or SNAP food assistance. When the University of Pennsylvania included the benefit cuts into their analysis, they found that the poorest 20% of households in this country will lose $30,000 over their lifetime if this bill gets signed into law. It's quite literally a reverse Robin Hood scheme, taking from the poor and giving to the ultra rich. That's why I had an amendment that said there should not be tax giveaways for those earning more than $10 million per year. And so, Secretary Besson, I only want a yes or no answer. Would you have voted yes or no on my amendment?
Again, no.
I yield back.
Mr. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again. Thanks for sitting here. Your predecessor, Janet Yellen, pushed Congress for the last 4 years to adopt the OECD global tax deal. I'm grateful that you and the administration have been working to stop this. There's a lot going on in that space. And as the current global tax deal is formulated, U.S. multinationals are disadvantaged in two critical ways. First, they face two layers of minimum taxes, the existing robust U.S. system and the emerging OECD system. And two, their traditional income-based tax incentives face stricter scrutiny against the corporate welfare regimes in China and the EU. The global tax deal fosters a kind of a Hunger Games style race for government handouts, cash subsidies, and refundable tax credits. The system rewards political connections and authoritarian regimes over innovation. And Mr. Secretary, as you know, countries are pressuring the U.S. to sign on to the global tax deal and want to push subsidies out of the income tax system into the hands of bureaucrats, distorting markets, picking winners and losers, and leaving their taxpayers footing the bill for political pet projects with dismal economic results. If other nations want to tie their economies in knots with that nonsense, that's their funeral. The U.S. should not play the role of global nanny, dictating domestic policy to sovereign states. Countries around the world are free to determine a domestic policy that meets their political and economic demands, but not at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer and our great U.S. companies. My concern, Mr. Secretary, is that there is an on and off switch associated with the implementation of this global tax deal. A lot of uncertainty of what's happening after your time in office and the president's time in office. The tax sovereignty of this nation is under attack. The last administration gave away U.S. leverage trying to sell the jurisdiction and purview of this committee to the OECD in Paris. We must not let that happen. The global tax deal isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a loaded gun aimed at countries that don't join the cabal. I, for one, don't want the U.S. to be looking at the end of their loaded gun under the next administration or the one after that. Mr. Secretary, will you commit to working with us to put a nail in this coffin on the global tax deal once and for all?
My staff met with the OECD in Paris just last week, and we are pushing back and working toward a solution as soon as possible, Congressman.
Thank you for your work on that. And then one last thing. The current tax code has certainly been biased against investments and structures, and I've been working on this issue for a number of years since I've been on the Ways and Means, including a bill I introduced that implements a neutral cost recovery for structures while we should continue to do more in this space to drive down the cost of investment in structures, I know that's part of the big plan to get manufacturing back here quickly. I'm happy that we're moving in this right direction. And long depreciation schedules, as you know and as you've worked on, erode the value of deductions, hindering growth on domestic manufacturing. The provision that we included in the big one, beautiful bill that allowed full expensing of factories coupled with restoration of 100% of President Trump's agenda to boost American manufacturing. We're hearing a lot of great things about that. Mr. Secretary, I want to reiterate my thanks, certainly the Republican Party's thanks for your immense support in this provision to implement full expensing of factories. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time to you to just talk about why that is so important to move quickly on this to get it done and what it's going to do for our economy.
Congressman, it provides great surety, but more than that, it provides the impetus for businesses to make capital allocation very quickly, and in a way, it puts us on an even playing field with the countries that heavily subsidize their industry. In the United States, we try not to, some administrations like the past one try to pick winners and losers. We do not. We try to set the best playing field and create the best environment. So the surety of immediate expensing is very powerful in terms of after-tax return on capital. After-tax return on capital is what drives this economy, it is what drives productivity, and it is what makes the United States the greatest economy in the world.
Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate your words, and I yield back.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield.
Win Moore, Democrat from Wisconsin, now with Scott Bessent, live on Bloomberg.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the nonpartisan policy research Yale Budget Lab analysis, which shows that $3,000 cut to household income because of Trump's tariffs.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back to Ms. Moore.
The Yale Budget Lab is staffed by
Thank you. This is my time,
former
sir.
Biden officials.
Where's the gavel, Mr. Chairman? He's taking up my time.
Proceed. The clock's moving, Ms. Moore.
Thank you. I want to join my colleagues on a bipartisan basis in regaling the life and times of Charlie Rangel. And actually, Mr. Chairman, were he alive today would be his 95th birthday. And you know, even if it weren't his birthday, I would have to have thought of Charlie Rangel at this moment. And the last real close personal conversation that I had with him when I considered your testimony here today, Mr. Secretary, and some of the other sorts of inquiries and comments of my colleagues here when they talked about the averages, the average taxpayer is going to receive this or that. It's sort of like the example that you almost gave here. You know, one taxpayer gets $1 million tax refund, another one gets a $1 tax refund, and then the average tax refund is $500,050. I had a Jesuit education, so we learned about the tyranny of averages. You ignore the distribution and outliers. You mask variations and inequalities. It's asymmetrically distributed. It's skewed. Because you have heard my colleagues talk about the real impact. Somebody under $50,000 a year is going to get $265 versus others that get millions. That is not a question. That was my comment. Okay, so you and Doge were focused on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. So let me just sort of outline some of the waste, fraud, and abuse that you found and tell me yes or no, was this what you found? $641 billion in subsidies for the ACA, $764 billion in Medicaid cuts, $300 billion in SNAP cuts, and then triggering $500 billion in Medicare cuts. Was that all waste, fraud, and abuse? Yes or no?
Again, ma'am, it's very, very difficult to give a yes
those
or,
are the cuts. Okay, I'll move on. You're not going to answer.
Very, very difficult.
What I'd like to know is the $2.4 billion in debt and the tax increases of $4.5 trillion. Is that not spending? Are tax cuts spending and creating, especially not just adding to the debt, but the interest rates on the debt? Is that or is that not spending? Yes or no? Are tax cuts, if I give you a tax cut, am I spending out of the Treasury to do that? Yes or no?
Not if we,
Mr. Secretary.
not if we create more income.
Okay,
than the nature of
we're
the
talking about a gambler's fallacy with projecting growth that's never been proven by anybody, anything. So I will move on because I see my time is waning. Let me ask you some more questions. Do you think that a problem we have in our tax code is that we have $700 billion a year in a tax gap because you know, the very wealthy are evading illegally their tax responsibilities? Is that or is that not waste, fraud, and abuse? Would you characterize that as waste, fraud, and abuse? I'm just a simple question. Is that waste, fraud, and abuse?
My priorities are collection, privacy, and customer service.
Okay, so but
you're
we're not collecting that, and you cut 31% of the budget from the IRS that would have actually, you know, processed these claims.
The largest budget cut was in the IT department that began the modernization in 1990.
Okay, the true cost of economic security has determined that 50% of Americans are financially insecure. 50% of Americans. So do you think that any of them are going to suffer from the cuts in Medicaid, SNAP, and ACA not to have these resources available to them? Yes or no?
I believe that they will be better
off without these
under
resources.
this tax bill, just as they were under President Trump's last term, as opposed to the ravages of inflation under President Biden's term.
Well, let me just ask this. Why is this bill designed to take away some of the benefits that you claim people are going to have? They expire, like the senior tax credit expires, all of these things that these families are supposed to get. If you're so into uplifting their needs, why do they expire?
No tax on tips.
No tax on tips expires.
Sorry?
It expires. And it's not really a decrease on tax on tips.
If you would like to join me in making it permanent and have your Democratic
you're the secretary. You're the secretary, sir. You wrote the budget.
We would welcome you to join us.
Excuse me?
We would welcome you to join us.
I'm ready to join you right now. You would accept an amendment?
Time has expired, Ms. Moore, by over a minute. I was very generous, but wait.
Mr. Chairman, you are always very generous. Let's be clear. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. The chair would like to inform the members that the committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes following Ms. Miller's time. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm from West Virginia, and I'm going to give you a little Southern love. I graduated from Columbia College. My husband graduated from the Citadel. So we've got some roots in common.
Carol Miller of West Virginia now in questioning with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
After 4 years of inflation and unmonitored spending and non-existent trade negotiations under the previous administration, I'm thrilled to have you and President Trump back at the helm to deliver on America First policies. Having businessmen rather than career politicians running the country is already making a huge difference. Ways and Means Republicans have spent the better part of 2 years gearing up to reauthorize the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and put more pro-working class tax policies in place. This committee passed the most significant tax bill in modern history last month, and the House followed suit. It is now time for the Senate to do their job and get this big, beautiful bill to the president's desk. I want to talk about 1099-K. One of my top priorities in the tax package is to repeal the Democrats' absurd 1099-K threshold. Under the Biden administration, Democrats changed the time-tested standard of $20,000 in 200 transactions to $600 when determining whether a taxpayer receives a 1099-K or not. Before this committee, your predecessor acknowledged that this new threshold would be difficult to administer and to lead to the taxpayers' confusion. So instead of working with us to fix it, the Biden Treasury unconstitutionally delayed implementation and then changed the threshold to try and ease the taxpayers' confusion in the election year. Unfortunately, there are still millions more 1099-K forms that were sent out, and Republicans have worked to restore the 1099-K threshold to the time-tested standard of $20,000 in 200 transactions by including my Saving Gig Economy Taxpayer Act in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Can you shed some light on how this policy and others being produced from your department will make life easier for our taxpayers?
Representative, thank you for discussing these very important issues. As I said, I believe the underappreciated part of President Trump's economic plan is the deregulation. And what you were describing, the cutting back on paperwork, that putting thresholds at proper level is indeed deregulation, lower paperwork. And I think they correctly pointed out that the previous administration, I'm not sure that anyone ever signed the front of a paycheck or the back of a paycheck. I think they mostly received direct deposit from the U.S. government because they're always government employees. So if you have never made payroll, if you are not processing paperwork, you don't understand the costs that are inherent in this. If you are a small business person, if you are someone with a lawn care business, if you are someone, as you said, we have a completely new economy today with the gig economy. Whether it is Uber drivers, delivery people, the contract workers who work from home, in programming fields. So I think that it was tone deaf, completely tone deaf for the nature of the new economy.
You are so right. And I also want to voice my support for the ongoing trade negotiations that the president and you are working on. For too long, our trusted trade partners have quietly taken advantage of the United States. And I'm a firm believer that trade truly is the great equalizer and a powerful tool to bring the world together. However, sometimes the tool can be used effectively and not always with fairness. I'm particularly interested in the domestic steel industry from West Virginia. We've been producing quality steel for decades, and some in my hometown in Huntington and my district is currently ramping up more steel production even further with new mills in Mason County. So I'm supportive of the Section 232 tariffs on steel that the president has pursued, and I'm eager to work together with the administration to ensure that a level playing field is also applied to the U.S.-UK economic prosperity deal. The UK has a history of subsidizing its steel industry, which in turn often undercuts our domestic steel producers. Can you commit to continuing working on securing fairness for our domestic steel industry across trade deals?
Representative Miller, I had the privilege of being with the president at the U.S. Steel factory in Pittsburgh a week ago Friday. And I can tell you that the president's commitment to the U.S. steel industry is unwavering, that we are bringing back domestic production. And what we have seen, and one of the previous questions about is China a reliable partner, what we have seen during COVID since then is that there are strategic industries in the United States where we must have an industrial base. And I would put steel in the top 3.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The committee will stand in recess for exactly 10 minutes.
Live from Capitol Hill and here on Bloomberg Radio, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, there dropping the gavel for a bit of a break here. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has not had a lot of sleep, as you might think back to the late edition of Balance of Power yesterday when he was just leaving London following U.S.-China trade talks in for 2 rounds today. He will actually be back on Capitol Hill at 4 o'clock, and we'll resume our coverage of this hearing before the Ways and Means Committee with questioning on the U.S.-China trade deal, on reconciliation, and the greater strength of the economy. Wall Street is not getting a real lift out of this conversation if traders are paying attention, and we do want to update the markets right now. Charlie Pellet is at World Headquarters in New York with the trade. Charlie?
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Indeed, earlier gains have fizzled. The S&P 500 index now in the red, trading lower by 5 points, a bounce off the bottom, but still lower. The Dow holding on to a gain of 89 points, up 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index right now is down 37, drop there of 0.2%. The 10-year on this CPI Wednesday, 4.42%, with a 2-year that's currently yielding 3.95%. Gold now at $33.31 the ounce, up $7, up by 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 2.5%, surging to $66.58 a barrel. And Bitcoin just about flat on the day, down 0.4%, 109,573 on Bitcoin. So bottom line here, we do have stocks shuffling between small gains and losses as traders look past that upbeat report on cooling consumer prices. We're also assessing the outlook for global trade. Recapping, S&P down 3, drop there of 0.1%. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here is Joe Matthew.
Hey, Charlie, many thanks to Charlie Pellet. He'll be back a little later in the broadcast as we keep tabs on Wall Street. And in the meantime, waiting for the Treasury Secretary to return following a brief intermission in the hearing before the Ways and Means Committee. We wanted to spend a bit of time with Stuart Paul, of course, U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics, just to hash out a bit of what we heard and also talk about the data this morning. Of course, an important day here with U.S. core inflation rising less than forecast. He had the wind at his back, Stuart, when it came to CPI this morning and kind of the backdrop for this conversation. And we're getting a real I told you so out of the White House when it comes to Trumponomics, or whatever we call it. How good is this news, and what does it mean for the Fed?
That's right. So he started off this testimony before the House Ways and Means Committee with a bit of a victory lap because this morning's consumer price inflation data came in lower than expected, the headline rising just 0.1%, same for the core on the month. And I think that what most folks are breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief about is that the headline has not been blown out because of tariffs that had gone into effect. The thing that we see when we look at the details, however, is that things like home furnishings, appliances, electronics, sporting equipment, things that we import from China, those are all seeing the effects of tariffs. We are seeing firms pass through tariff costs to consumers. Where we're seeing disinflation offsetting that effect is in a lot of these services categories. So we're seeing shelter prices rising just a little bit less. But more importantly, we're seeing travel-related prices, airfares, hotels, they're just outright declining. Part of that is because of canceled travel plans from folks from abroad that are seeing this trade war developing and deciding to cancel their trips to the U.S. So
interesting.
It's not entirely the case that the low inflation reading is good news. Trumponomics is necessarily working. We are seeing higher costs because of tariffs, and we are seeing lower costs in some services categories because folks are trimming their spending where they can.
Well, part of the argument here from the administration now is that the reconciliation bill, the one big beautiful bill that's in between the House and the Senate at the moment, is going to goose the economy. It's going to create growth that is not being quantified by the Congressional Budget Office or mainstream economists. Scott Bessent talked about that in his testimony a short time ago. Stuart, let's listen.
The One Big Beautiful Bill will also incentivize unprecedented investment in U.S. manufacturing. The legislation will provide 100% expensing for new factories, as well as existing factories that expand operations and support Made in America. It will streamline burdensome permitting processes that often stand in the way of new manufacturing projects.
The problem, Stuart, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you cannot quantify the benefits of cutting red tape when it comes to economic growth, right? Can you put a number on that as an economist?
It's very difficult to do. Beyond cutting red tape, Secretary Besson put forward the idea that the dynamism that you get from more efficient allocation of private capital that comes with tax cuts or permanent extensions or longer term extensions of existing tax rates, that helps to propel growth. What was interesting during the hearing, Joe, and I'm sure you saw this also, is that I believe it was Ranking Member Neal asked the question, Secretary Besson, can you name a single independent economist who would say that the dynamism created and the growth created by cutting these taxes more than offsets the cost of the bill, the reduced revenue? There were audible laughs in the room when Secretary Besson pointed to Art Laffer. It is a clearly politically wrought person in the field of economics and a politically wrought topic for folks to deal with. It is the case that the one big beautiful bill will undoubtedly add to the national debt on the order of a few $1 trillion. It is difficult to account for the dynamism created by cutting red tape, but that's because these are some of the consequences of the aggregate economic measures. It's not just so much the case that we could just mark down a number by waving our finger in the air and feeling which way the wind is blowing.
Right. Well, look, we have a smart audience here. You're talking. We hear a lot of references, Stuart, to the Laffer curve, specifically when Republican lawmakers are trying to make that argument to connect the dots between tax cuts and growth, right? Between tax rates and total tax revenue. What should our listeners and viewers be thinking when they hear that reference?
Sure. So the basic premise of the Laffer curve is that if you set tax rates exceptionally low, let's say at 0%, you will get zero tax revenue. If you set tax rates exceptionally high, let's say 100%, you crush economic activity so much that you also get $0 in revenue. There is some tax rate between 0 and 100 that gives you the maximum amount of revenue. And the question is always, if the tax rate is too high, then by lowering it, you can unleash economic activity and generate additional revenue. That's if you're above the point that we would associate with a peak of this so-called Laffer curve. Alternatively, and this is what Democrats typically argue, if your tax rate is below the point of maximum revenue on the Laffer curve, you raise taxes and raise revenues. It's one of those circumstances where when we look at current tax rates, most folks would say that raising rates would raise additional revenue. By pointing out one independent economist who would say that the one big beautiful bill raises revenue by pointing out that it's Art Laffer himself, Secretary Besson is in a sense esoterically acknowledging that there is no one else who would say that we are currently with tax rates above the point that generates maximum revenue. So
this is incredible. I'd get fired anywhere else for having this conversation on the air, but this is Bloomberg, Stuart, and you just landed the plane so perfectly. When you go to the cocktail party later on, we give you permission. You don't have to give us credit for it. When you explain to everybody what the Laffer curve is, and they all ask you for your business card, just remember, it was Stuart Paul. Producer Matt reminds us, Art Laffer, not a tariff guy. Do we really want to keep hanging that name out there?
No, his association is with taxes. It's funny that you bring up cocktail parties because the idea of this Laffer curve was originally just drawn on the back of a cocktail napkin at a cocktail party. He is a character mostly focused on taxes. And I think that most folks, even on the Republican side of the aisle, when they look at the one big beautiful bill, they'll even acknowledge that the permanent or that the extension of tax of the TCJA will add to the debt. It's only when you account for revenue that comes from tariffs do you get to something closer to deficit neutral. But that's outside of the bill. That's coming from the White House. That is not coming from the Congress.
See, now you can admit that you just want to go to a cocktail party with Stuart Paul. The X date came up, Stuart. Secretary called it a moving target and said that he expects it will be middle to late summer pretty consistent with what we've been hearing so far. And then that brings up the whole question about whether they can get this bill done in time. It's got a raising of the debt ceiling in the reconciliation bill. But if they come too close on this, if things slow down in negotiations, they're going to have to handle this separately. How come he won't give us a more careful date on this? He seems to think, and he's said as much, that it creates more urgency if lawmakers don't know. Is that a good way to do business?
Well, it's interesting. We've seen strategic ambiguity used as a concept in foreign policy negotiations, specifically with U.S. Relationship with China vis-a-vis Taiwan. Strategic ambiguity when it comes to when the U.S. would default on its debt obligations is certainly a new strategy here. Secretary Bessent has been urging the Congress to get this done before the August recess. I think that he's been ambiguous to try to provoke some doubt about when the X date is, try to encourage some folks to think that maybe it's in July. Let's get the bill passed before everybody leaves. By our best estimates, the X date is closer to mid-August. And if Secretary Bessent
Is that why the
knows
bond market's not freaking out?
I think that's right. But if Secretary Bessent knows it also, and he's just trying to encourage the one big beautiful bill to get done, get the debt ceiling raised as part of this comprehensive program, he would want to encourage some of this ambiguity and questioning.
Interesting. You know, we were talking earlier, Stuart, just the impression and the sort of gravitas and weight that the Secretary of the Treasury brings to the national conversation and how we look at them differently. When you think of testimony from Janet Yellen, there'd be roadblock coverage because she hadn't done an interview in probably 6 months, right? There'd be parsing of words. There would not be partisan conversation as we heard earlier. Are they getting back together, James? Brendan, oh, geez. All right, well, hold that thought. And with that backdrop, listen to Scott Bessent here. Brendan Boyle, the congressman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, in questioning now in the Ways and Means Committee. Big thanks to Stuart Paul. Let's get back to the hearing live.
The substance of what he said, does it not add trillions of dollars, your bill, to the deficit and debt?
It's not my belief that it does. It may be his. He could speak for himself.
But of course, it's not just Mr. Musk. It is the Congressional Budget Office. It is conservative-leaning groups like Tax Foundation, Cato, left-leaning groups, and nonpartisan groups like CBO and JCT. So this bill has actually united the left, the right, and the center, all saying it massively increases deficit and debt. But they're all wrong and you're right?
Congressman, I think that there are a range of outcomes that I think that many do not include the pro-growth measures, just as they were wrong with the original TCJA. And that has proven to be a resounding success. Just as I don't know if you were here to vote for the IRA, the CBO scoring on that, it has been 3 to 4 times more expensive.
So it's curious to me because you spent decades as an executive at George Soros's hedge fund, being very successful, making billions of dollars. Back then, you would always rail against deficit and debt. What's happened?
Again, that it is smart spending. That what are we spending for? Are we
tax cuts that mostly go to billionaires such as yourself? While throwing 16 million people off their health care coverage.
Well, I would dispute that 16 million. I think you're conflating a lot of numbers.
No, it's the, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Those aren't my numbers, just to be clear. As you know, it's the Congressional Budget Office projection.
I think you're adding up a lot of numbers that shouldn't be added.
Excuse me, I am adding 2 specific numbers. The cuts CBO found coming to Medicaid. No, if we're entitled to our own opinions, but not our own facts and not our own numbers. The CBO shows that 10.9 million will lose their health care coverage from the Medicaid cuts, and another 5.1 million will lose their health care coverage due to the ACA cuts. 10.9 plus 5.1 is 16 million.
So you are adding numbers. 1.4 million.
Yes, correctly.
Do you support Medicaid for illegal aliens? 1.4
I am asking the questions, not you. Although you'll be happy to know that in my Commonwealth, home state, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, actually they check your citizenship status before you can enroll in Medicaid. But I understand why you're wanting to divert and change the subject. Let me move, since we've taken up already most of my time. The World Bank yesterday had a shocking growth projection They slashed their growth projection for the United States by upwards of 40%. I'm just curious, do you agree or do you think they're wrong as well? Because they specifically cited the trade uncertainty caused by your administration, the administration that you serve as Secretary of the Treasury, as being the primary reason why they've had to slash their growth projection to the lowest since 2008.
Congressman, you kindly cited the success that I may or may not have had in my previous career, but I could tell you I would not have had it if I followed World Bank projections.
So it is interesting that you believe all of these groups are wrong, from your former colleague Elon Musk, to left-leaning groups, to right-leaning groups, to center groups, to the World Bank. Everything is going hunky-dory. The reality is, I can see why you would have that opinion. You, as a billionaire, will reap the rewards of this tax cut, while 16 million Americans will lose their health coverage. That is the sad reality of the situation.
We could look at who would be most harmed if these tax cuts expire.
Well, you'll be happy to know that on this Democratic side of the dais, through an 18-hour markup, every single Democratic member voted to extend the tax cuts for everyone making under $1 billion. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Dr. Murphy.
Thank you, Secretary, for coming in. I apologize for the bellicose manner in which you're being treated. I think if we all want respectful parlay. And
Congressman Greg Murphy, Republican from North Carolina now, the Ways and Means Committee.
I'm just going to take a side. I am a physician in healthcare. I always want everybody to be able to access healthcare. But if I can say 3 words: illegal, ineligible, and able. So let's go to the illegal part first. The last party let in anywhere between 13 and 20 million people in this country illegally. And now they're placing their healthcare burden on the rest of the American country. So let's talk about the illegals, providing healthcare for illegals. By the way, those aren't American citizens. 2, ineligible. Last administration did not allow states to audit their Medicaid rules. Guess what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to say, hey, you're still fit eligibility, you're a impoverished child, you're a pregnant woman, you're a disabled person, you're an impoverished senior citizen, you are eligible. But if you're not, you are not eligible for Medicaid. Period. Able-bodied. Who can be against able-bodied individuals working to get health care? I mean, my gosh. So I'm hearing this ridiculous statistic of 16 million people who should not be eligible, who are not eligible. It is just embarrassing every time they bring this thing up. So anyway, I do want to get back to the fact that our nation now, and this is blames on Republicans and Democrats, has gone far too long as far as where our economy is. We become a service economy. We become a government employment economy. We make some things, we assemble other things, but we don't manufacture things. We've talked about this. I look at this of what's happened in North Carolina, the drying up of cities, especially in the East. I want to talk a little bit about tariffs, and this is a difficult discussion. I'm hearing more and more from manufacturers in North Carolina that the tariffs in the short term are harming them. Specifically, tariffs on inputs used in manufacturing, driving up costs and making products uncompetitive when exporting to third country markets. These export markets are highly competitive, and U.S. companies have to compete with the EU, with China, other countries to be able to offer their products cheaper. Who can offer their products cheaper than U.S.? I really just would like to know how we're going to navigate this. I really believe our tariff policy was necessary. You can only affect economic policy by one of 2 ways: militarily, which no one wants, or by tariffs. And to get our country reversed back on a path it should be, we have to do this. But help me understand how the U.S. is going to help our companies in this difficult time remain their competitiveness.
Well, Congressman, as I discussed earlier, the most powerful thing we're going to do is give them great certainty and permanence in this tax bill. We will also allow 100% expensing, both for the new equipment and for factory structures, and that will provide a substantial savings and impetus. So I believe that that will aid in the manufacturing here. We are also working with industry, and again, it is across a wide range that we will see. Some companies will make less, some will make more.
I appreciate that. You know, I love to see our growth in our manufacturing. During the last administration, we had 3 to 7 million individuals who are able-bodied adult of working age come off of the workforce. We need workers. And guess what? Some of those people will come off Medicaid and actually get insurance by their job. So again, just a little bit of truth. Real quickly.
And Congressman, as I said earlier, that we have approximately 9% of of the workforce that is in manufacturing. Historically, real wage increases accrue to manufacturing workers faster than lower end service economy workers. So I think we could still see real wage growth there also.
Right, facts matter. Quickly, I'd like to talk to you about transshipment. Transshipment by Chinese companies have undermined President Trump's Section 301 tariffs, and the problem seems to be getting worse. Can you elaborate by any chance if any discussion with China was done about transshipment, or is that in order? Is that going to be discussed?
Well, we, as you can imagine, they pushed back on the de minimis exemption, which we have gotten rid of, and we are going to, we are tariffing all the de minimis imports. We are going to set a level, and it will be a global level, not only for Chinese imports, although China floods the zone, because that is their business model, is to export their deflationary impulse, which is unacceptable to the rest of the world, especially for U.S. citizens. So we are going to set a global level for these de minimis imports.
Thank you. It's nice to see an administration actually do something on trade. We did nothing in the last 4 years, and I'm sorry if it hurts people's feelings that they've tariffed against us and we're retaliating, trying to do things better for the American people. Support what you do, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Kustoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today and after your long days of travel. So thank you very much for being here. If I could ask you, Mr. Secretary, there's been a lot of attention lately and a lot of conversation around the bond markets and rising yields for
Congressman
US
David
Treasuries.
Kustoff of Tennessee now speaking with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Address that, maybe some reassurance. Maybe a couple of questions. First of all, what is your current assessment of the bond markets and your view of the upward pressure on Treasury yields recently?
Congressman, if I could break that down into three pieces. One is the smooth functioning of the bond market. So even during the April high volume, high volatility period, the bond markets functioned very well, trades cleared. There was never a question of financial stability. Two, at Treasury, our bond issuance is going quite well. We are actually seeing an uptick in primary purchasers as opposed to, so these are the end users who would hold it as opposed to dealers or flippers. And then three, as I said earlier, the United States 10-year is the only major 10-year yield in the world that is down on the year, down in the year. So for all the sky is falling and cries of what's happening, or that a crisis is inevitable, the U.S. continues to be the most stable bond market.
You've had a lot of questions today about the One Big Beautiful Bill, and a lot of questions, very detailed questions. What would happen to the economy if Congress were to fail to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill and the majority of the tax cuts from 2017 were to expire?
Well, again, Congressman, there are two parts there. So one, the OBBB, as I call it, contains the debt ceiling raise and extension. So that cannot happen. That must be raised and extended. And so we will not even talk about the ramifications of that because it will never happen. Two, as I said, it would be an economic sudden stop where we would see a cataclysmic event for working Americans, for job creation, for the financial system. So it's unthinkable that this could happen. It would be the largest tax increase in history. And again, I'm not necessarily, I was criticized for my criticism of the CBO. I'm not necessarily going after the men and women who work there. I'm going after their insufficient models, because their insufficient models say that if we make permanent the tax bill, that we don't get an increase in growth. But to your point, if somehow the one big beautiful bill were not passed, that growth will remain the same, which is obviously the ridiculous assumption.
Wouldn't it be devastating for the economy if we failed to pass the one big beautiful bill?
Sir, I think it could set off the financial crisis, the likes of which we have not seen since 08-09.
Mr. Secretary, you would rather be Treasury Secretary than Chairman of the Federal Reserve, wouldn't you?
Sir, I think I have, with the, other than some congressional reporting, the best job in Washington. And I am happy to do what President Trump wants me to do. And I think that we are making great progress at Treasury. I can tell you that having been in the business building now since January 28th, the professional staff is incredible. And the political staff that we brought in, everyone is working well together. We are working to enhance the economy for the American people, maintain the reserve status of the U.S. dollar, and to your first question, make sure that the U.S. Treasury market, which is the largest and soundest and bellwether for the world, maintains that status. And I would like to stay in my seat through 2029 to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have repeatedly said that there are no outside experts who support the one big beautiful bill, and I would like to correct that for the record for a moment. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to submit for the record a letter that was sent to President Trump, Speaker Mike Johnson, and Leader John Thune on June 3rd, showing 300 economists' support for the one big beautiful bill. They urge speedy adoption of legislation to enact pro-growth tax policies. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Good, and Congressman, I believe I may have been in London when that was published, so I look forward to perusing the names of the economists on that list.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the role of the Secretary of the Treasury is one of the most important and consequential in the entire federal government. You're responsible for our nation's economic prosperity.
This Congressman Don Byer, the Democrat from Virginia, now questioning Secretary.
You're a successful guy with an Ivy League education. Well, I would assume that you would understand that to execute on these objectives, you must apply foundational, widely acceptable principles to support economic growth. For example, a climate of economic stability and predictability, ensuring the economy has a strong and stable workforce, supporting science and innovation, and much more. Yet at every turn, your policies fly in the face of these basic principles. The erratic tariffs have thrown the markets and consumer confidence into free fall, while driving up costs for businesses and consumers alike. The misguided and cruel immigration policies of this administration are forcing highly skilled talent to seek opportunities outside of the U.S. and have left businesses across the country without workers they need and our communities depend upon. And the indiscriminate sassing of our libraries, medical research centers, NIH, the National Science Foundation, have forced our scientific progress backwards. At the same time, your public comments about the state of the economy suggest you don't even understand the severity of the damage that you're causing. For example, for months, despite every indication to the contrary, you've suggested that the U.S. dollar is not weakening, but instead that currencies of other countries are growing stronger. This might be more credible if the dollar hadn't weakened against gold most of all. That's akin to suggesting our sea levels aren't rising, that the land is shrinking. Demand for treasuries is weakening and the markets aren't buying what you're selling. The only time the markets have reacted positively is when the administration is in retreat from key policy areas. I want to say, given your successful past, isn't this embarrassing?
Is there a question there, sir?
There's a question. Isn't this embarrassing?
Oh, it isn't embarrassing. Well, I'm sorry, Congressman, but you seem not to have seen the economic data. The GDP growth has been quite substantial. Job growth is solid.
GDP growth is half what it was last year, sir.
The job growth is solid, and we had
job growth is a third what it was all last year, sir.
No. And private sector job growth especially. And if you'd like to talk about inflation, would you?
The inflation has been coming down. Just the inflation is good so far. We will see every economic thing I read, which is much every day, suggests the impact of the tariffs is not hit yet.
Well, why don't we look at the data rather than the hysteria, which is how I made my career.
Let me move on. You like to use the phrase strategic uncertainty as a justification for the tariff mess, pretending that the erratic policies have been the result of a clever, thoughtful plan, which is impossible to believe. There's a common assertion with these tariffs that I'm struggling to understand. The committee just passed a reconciliation bill that's going to explode the deficit by almost $3 trillion. The president tells us that's just fine because according to the CBO, if all of his tariff policies remain in place, we're going to see $2.8 trillion in new taxes from the tariffs. You used that number earlier today over the next 10 years. But here's my question. If you're supposedly cutting all these deals, 90 deals in 90 days, and the president's going to retain the power to adjust tariffs on a whim, how can we reasonably expect that those $2.8 trillion in new tariff revenues are going to be real? Isn't this just one more example of how the lack of a plan is going to lead to an explosion in the nation's debt? How do you have your cake and eat it too? Well, you claim the tariff revenue is going to offset the increase in debt, and yet you also say you're going to get rid of that tariff revenue by negotiating 90 new deals.
Well, Congressman, two things. It sounds like you're questioning the CBO because that's the CBO score, not my number.
You used it today.
Yeah, but it's the CBO score. So if you want to use CBO, let's use CBO. They're claiming $2.4 trillion in new debt, and they're also saying 2.8 in tariff income. Even in Washington math, that's plus 400 billion.
That does miss the 500 billion in new interest on the debt, which takes it up to 3 trillion. But
so
finally,
you don't agree with the CBO either.
In my 45 seconds, your counterpart, Secretary Lutnick, recently declared on television that Trump's president's tariffs are not going away, quote unquote, even with your deal on China that you announced. Secretary Lutnick was asked by Senator Kennedy if he'd accept a deal that removed trade barriers for places like Vietnam, and he gave an answer that was frankly all over the place and difficult to understand. We're less than a month away from Liberation Day Part 2. Very few of the trade deals have been announced yet. I think most people in Congress and around the world would like to know what's going on. Should America be preparing for Liberation Day 2.0? What do we plan for July 9th and July 2nd?
I would say, as I have repeatedly said, that there are 18 important trading partners. We are working toward deals on those, and it is highly likely that those countries that are negotiating or trading blocs, as in the case of the EU, who are negotiating in good faith, we will roll the date forward to continue good faith negotiations. If someone is not negotiating, then we will not.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the Democrats and the left continue to say that this is just a tax cut for
Republican Congressman
so
Greg Stubbe of Florida now with Scott Bessent live on Bloomberg.
Sir, as we saw last time, the impetus or the higher collections were on the upper bracket. So the top 10%, the top 1% pay more. If I weigh 200 pounds and my sister weighs 100 pounds, which is approximately right, and we both lose 10% weight, then I lose 20 pounds and she loses 10. So they prefer to speak in absolute rather than percentages. So the percent increase, as the Congressman Arrington said earlier, that we went from approximately the top 10% paying 38% to 45%. So that it's a very loud talking point that lacks all logic.
And so who would be hurt the most if Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires?
As I have said, a sudden stop in the economy always hurts the working Americans. So the bottom 50% of wage earners would be hurt by far the most, as they always are. And on the other side, they will be helped the most, as they were during the first Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The working Americans did better. The minority households did better. Working households saw a substantial increase in their household net worth compared to the household net worth increase of the top 10%. So again, in percentage terms, which is what matters, and Congressman, what also matters is how much do Americans keep? What is the return? Because we just experienced this great inflation. The statistics said that inflation was 21%. The goods basket for most Americans, because it includes the cars, insurance, groceries, was in excess of 30%. So that inflation, they're still trying to recover from this affordability crisis. And as I said earlier, there are two ways to recover from that. Lower the prices, which we're working hard to do. Gasoline prices are down substantially. Or have real wage increases, which we believe that this bill will drive.
Well, that's not even touching on if we did not pass this bill, the increase on small businesses by the 199A deduction going up by almost 20%, the impact that would have on small businesses in our country.
Exactly, Congressman. And as I've said many times, and I get somehow my friends on Wall Street accuse me of being a redistributionist when I say Wall Street's done great. It's time for Main Street to do great. Wall Street can still do fine. Both can do well together, but it is Main Street's time. Main Street is driven by small business. We are working on regulations. I've probably met, including conferences, over 300 small and community bankers to try to stop this regulatory noose that is around them so that they can grow the economy.
So the One Big Beautiful Bill had strong language blocking the use of ESG metrics in federal contracting and finance. How is Treasury ensuring that woke corporate activism is no longer subsidized or promoted with taxpayer dollars?
We have taken out all language at Treasury. We are looking at it in all contracts, and we are looking for the best outcomes. I think if you were to look at the CHIPS Act, which the Democrats thought was a great success, that there were so many woke bells and whistles in that it was impossible to get the money out the door by the Commerce Department during the tenure of the Biden administration.
In the little time I have left, President Trump has made clear that U.S. trade policy must put America workers first. How is Treasury working with USTR and other agencies to ensure that financial and trade policy is aligned with the America First agenda?
We work every day on that, and we are trying to, these trade deals or this trade situation did not happen overnight. It's happened over 20 or 40 years. As I said earlier, I agree with President Trump that I'm not blaming the countries. They got away with it. It was the administration, Congress, who let them get away with it. So we are pushing back on high tariff countries, non-tariff trade barriers, which could include things like local content requirements, currency manipulation, and then as in the case of China and many other countries, subsidies to industry and labor.
Thank you for your time today. I yield back.
Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary,
Live
thank you for
from
joining
Capitol
us
Hill,
today.
testimony with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent live before the House Ways and Means Committee. About 3 hours into the conversation here, having been in London late last evening for U.S.-China trade talks, and he's not done. He's going to be testifying in the other chamber again around 4 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington as we bring you a different sort of balance of power today from Washington. Washington with a series, Kayleigh, of conversations that we're going to have coming up from World Headquarters in New York. Interesting, though, to hear from Scott Bessent talking about a range of issues, not only the U.S.-China trade deal reconciliation, but potentially becoming the Fed chair, which has been a big talker over the last couple of hours here in Washington. He says he wants to keep his job through 2029.
Yeah, he likes what he's doing, though he did note, of course, whatever the president asks is something he would consider. But interesting to hear from him, not on that alone, not on China alone, but other subjects as well, including the cooler than expected CPI data that we got today, questions of the deficit and the debt ceiling timing, which he's saying is mid to late summer, couldn't get more specific than that. And of course, was asked a question or two related to Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency as well. Wide-ranging testimony, but of course, as Joe pointed out, it does come after his return literally just last night or early this morning from London, having spent hours and hours in negotiations over 2 days with his colleagues from the administration, Howard Lutnick and Jameson Greer, and Chinese counterparts, resulting in a deal that President Trump on Truth Social today is done, subject to final approval between President Xi and me, in which Beijing will be supplying rare earths magnets immediately. So as we consider this landscape between the U.S. and China and how it impacts investment, we go now to our colleague in New York, Bloomberg's Scarlett Fu, who's joined by a very special guest, Jim Chanos, president and founder of Chanos and Company. Scarlett.
Thank you so much, Kayleigh and Joe. Really appreciate your joining us today, Jim, on set here at Bloomberg World Headquarters. Kayleigh and Joe were talking, of course, about Scott Bessent testifying before the House Ways and Means Committee. And of course, this comes on the heels of 2 days of China-U.S. trade talks in which President Trump has declared a done deal. He talks about the U.S. imposing 55% tariffs on China and China imposing 10% on us. You are a longtime China bear. You've been monitoring the economy's transition from export investment led to one that's consumption led. You also teach at Yale Management School of Business. What kind of grade would you give this trade deal, this so-called trade deal?
I'd give it a temporary incomplete so far because we don't have all the details yet. And it doesn't seem to be a whole lot different from where we were, not too long ago. So I think we need to see, as always in these things, the devil's in the details. And so we'll have to see what goes on. But as I mentioned before we went on the air, it does appear that China ended up holding some cards after all.
Yeah, you're referring, of course, to rare earths and magnets. And it turns out that China does have a lot of leverage over that in terms of whether it allows licenses for export and how quickly it allows shipments. And this is something that industry had pressed President Trump on. Is this going to be a cudgel that Beijing continues to hold over the U.S.?
I mean, obviously, we're going to try to diversify and increase our sources of strategic metals and rare earths. I think the administration's been clear about that. But the fact of the matter is, Scarlett, I don't think the market ever really believed that the most onerous of tariffs was ever going to go in. I mean, even though the market was down 20% at one point at its worst day to day, I think on a daily close 12% in April. Earnings estimates for the S&P never really dropped that much. They flattened out, but they didn't collapse. And so the market has been kind of looking through all this for a while now.
Yeah, well, one stock that did move a lot, of course, is Tesla. And as a longtime skeptic of Tesla, I'm curious to get your take on the very public breakup between Elon Musk and President Trump. Musk is now saying that he has some regrets over his comments, and he also says that they went too far. Does this drama change Tesla's narrative or prospects in any material way?
Yeah, it was all at the end of the day, big never mind, right? Look, I think that depending on how this all came about, and there's all kinds of stories, and who knows, certainly everyone is going to tell their side of the story. The fact of the matter is, it does look like the legislation, with a lot of benefits for EVs and solar, is going to change that dynamic dramatically. And that does have a material effect on Tesla's businesses, both in the auto credits for their customers, $7,500 each, the so-called ZEV credits, the emissions credits that they sell for cash, that looks like it may be going away. And then a variety of possible IRA credits and certainly solar credits for their Solar City subsidiary. So there's a lot for them to lose in the House legislation. It may change with the Senate and with compromise, we'll have to see. But when we get past all the personal stuff and kind of all the craziness from last Thursday, there's some real impact in the legislation. And it doesn't appear that the White House is backing down on that.
Right, right. I mean, Elon Musk and his executives over at Tesla have also been promoting videos showing a driverless Tesla on the streets of Austin. And of course, that's a hint that their robo-taxi launch will move forward, I believe, at the end of this month. Does that remove some of the concern about the legislation that takes away some of those tax credits and tax benefits that Tesla has enjoyed?
Well, I mean, I think almost everyone at this point agrees that the company is not being valued for just its auto operations. It would be trading at $30 or $40 a share, not $300 and something. So the two pillars or three pillars that it rests on are autonomous driving, related robo-taxis, and then the Optimus robot line. And so everything has to go right for those valuations to play out. We'll see. I mean, robo-taxi, yesterday there were images of a robo-taxi in Austin, but what no one talked about was the trailer car right behind it. So
I did see that.
So does that mean there's two cars for every robo-taxi? And there was a driver in the second car. And so, I mean, and the cost model for this, people are using absurdly low numbers for the cost per mile, not understanding the cost for redundancy and safety, as well as self-insurance and a lot of other costs that aren't in people who are bullish in their models. So we'll have to see. And as for autonomy, I mean, full level 4, level 5 autonomy, I mean, they've been promising it for 10 years now, but they're still at level 2, just like everybody else. I maintain by 2030 or so, every car is going to have level 4 or 5 autonomy. It's going to be a standard feature, like cruise control is now, or anti-lock braking. So I think, at that point, you're then kind of relying on the robots.
Let's talk a little bit about that bullish environment you just mentioned. You've called the post-COVID market euphoria the golden age of fraud. And we've seen the S&P 500 have that gigantic drawdown in April, but it's now right back to within about 2% of its record high. On top of that, you've got a White House that has been shattering norms and continues to do so, and it plays loosey-goosey with laws and rules. How would you characterize the environment now?
Well, I mean, so Wall Street has been a center for this kind of activity in terms of stuff that I think crosses the line, i.e. the golden age of fraud. We now have a bipolar world because Washington, D.C. is also a center for it. Look, I think that this bull market is going to go until, it doesn't. I keep telling people we're going to need to fill every last bull, and Wall Street will do it. They took a good shot at it in 2021 with the advent of SPACs and NFTs and meme coins, and we're going to see that happen again, going forward. Issuance is already starting to increase dramatically. We're seeing a big pickup in insider sales, particularly in the companies we cover. So executives are selling to retail investors, which is not a good sign. And the SEC and regulators and others have taken generally a very, to be charitable, laissez-faire approach to the markets, where people can say almost anything they want. There's no downside to it. And the use of pro forma metrics, which I've been talking about for years now, just gets worse by the year.
So it sounds like, and I want to connect the dots to the White House as well here, because when the president is issuing meme coins and hosting dinners for the meme coins buyers, there's got to be a spillover effect into the business culture. Does it just give companies that are inclined already a free pass to engage in more questionable behavior? Yeah, except that meme coins aren't securities. At least that's been the ruling so far, right? And stocks and bonds are. And there are rules for saying things about stocks and bonds that don't necessarily apply to crypto. And so I see that the administration has very wisely stayed within that boundary of embracing crypto and get-rich-quick schemes, for lack of a better term, in crypto. But it's where people cross the line and start making promises about stocks and bonds that I'm concerned. That's my world, and I see just a lack of
a lack of oversight there.
All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into your world then. You no longer manage outside capital, but you do manage your own funds and you advise clients, Chinos and companies, a family office, and an advisory. And a new idea that you've just disclosed, a new short idea, is Carvana, CVNA.
Yeah.
The stock is up about 66% so far this year. It's made a round trip back to a 4-year high. It's a used auto retailer, which is a pretty straightforward business. Why do you call it a misunderstood story then?
So this is a revisit. We were short this stock successfully in 2022 and 2023, and covered, and now it's back. I joked the other day that investors on the long side look for that 100 bagger. We do too for companies that are already up 100x, and Carvana is basically up almost 100x from its lows in 2022 and 2023. So it's completely round trip back to where it was in 2021. But people have perceived it as a secular growth story. It's cyclical. Their revenues dropped year over year in mid 2023 from selling cars down over 30%. Units dropped. They came back. But what really has us going is a couple of things. First is the accounting. We love bad accounting. And this is a company that is now generating, over the latest 12 months, about 70% of their operating profit is coming from gain on sale of subprime loans. So they're originating subprime loans and selling them immediately for gains. And this is something that the chairman of the company, is very familiar with, Ernie Garcia II. And he started with a company called Ugly Duckling in the 90s that got into trouble for subprime lending. It then became Drive Time, and Drive Time is the ex-parent of Carvana. So there's a history here. But that amount of income coming from sale of subprime loans is staggering. And you should not be putting an enormous multiple on this, 50, 60, 70 times. On top of that, two other things that are kind of new to the story. Number one is the short interest has collapsed. It was one of the most shorted stocks in 2023. And now the short interest is back to multi-year lows as a percent of outstanding. So the other bears have given up. And number two, we've seen a dramatic increase in insider selling, something we just talked about, in May and June in the shares of Carvana. So the last time we saw this type of selling, the stock also was getting ready to go down dramatically.
Yeah, so that's another red flag. And of course, we should mention that we are out to Carvana for comment because of all of that. I want to switch gears a little bit here because you are also blowing up on social media over the last couple of days due to your call to go long Bitcoin and short MSTR strategy. Michael Saylor, the CEO of Strategy, spoke with us yesterday on Bloomberg Crypto. Here's what he told us about your trade.
I don't think he understands what our business model is. We're actually the largest issuer of Bitcoin-backed credit instruments in the world. So last week, we just raised $1 billion by selling a preferred stock, non-cumulative, called Stride. That means we basically borrowed money that we never have to pay back, that we pay a dividend on, but we could suspend the dividend if we needed to. So Jim has been thinking that we somehow needed to sell the equity. So at the end of the day, if he's lucky enough to short the stock below 1x NAV, we're going to issue the preferreds, buy back the stock, and make money for our shareholders. If the stock trades at a weak premium, we're just going to sell the preferreds. And if the stock rallies up, he's going to get liquidated and wiped out. What he still doesn't understand is we're not a holding company or a closed-end trust. We're an operating company. So when we issue, trust can't leverage the Bitcoin. They can't issue preferred shares. They can't issue permanent shares of equity at a premium. We can.
Jim, your response?
Yes, I always love it when management say, well, he just doesn't understand our business. Michael Saylor is a wonderful salesman, but that's what he is. He's a salesman. And what he's selling investors is the concept that you give me your money and I'm just going to go buy Bitcoin. And hopefully the value of my stock trades at a premium to the value of that Bitcoin. And so as long as I can keep doing that, I generate value. And this is, of course, I called it financial gibberish because on top of that, he also said in your interview, he said the company should not just be valued on the basis of the Bitcoin holdings, but on a multiple of the profits that accrue from when I do this financial alchemy. And I pointed out on social media, I said, well, that's akin to saying, well, my house that rose in value from $450,000 to $500,000 last year is not worth $500,000. It's worth $1.5 million because it's worth the $500,000 plus a 20 multiple on the $50,000 increase. And of course, that's absurd. But that's the claim he's making. On top of that, he's basically now saying that well, I'll sell preferred, not common, to dilute the shareholders and compress the premium. And let me just interject really importantly here. I'm actually doing what he is advocating, right? I am selling MicroStrategy securities to buy Bitcoin. Let's be clear, it's a hedge trade. I don't know where Bitcoin is going to go.
And it doesn't matter to you, actually.
Well, it doesn't matter. The premium compressing matters to me. And so it's important to understand that in 2024 and 2025, mostly at the end of 24 and 25, MicroStrategy has sold $35 billion roughly of securities, $33 billion in common and convertible into common, and $2 billion in preferred, most recently. The market for the preferred stock that he's selling is tiny relative to common. Let's be clear about that. And in his own words that you just played back, he makes a case that you have to be crazy to buy these preferreds, right? He's going to pay you a dividend, maybe. It's not redeemable. It's perpetual. And if I don't pay the dividends, they're not cumulative. I don't have to pay the back dividends. So, who in their right mind institutionally would buy these preferreds?
That's my question. Do you think there's always going to be buyers for these preferreds, especially if Bitcoin starts to trend lower or go materially lower?
And again, he said, well, if the stock trades below a 1M multiple to MNAV, we call it, Chanos, I'll just buy back my common. I can assure you, if it trades below 1, I will have covered my short.
Is there a catalyst, though, or a certain set of conditions that would drive the premium down to collapse?
The catalyst is Michael Saylor. He's been selling equity to himself, compress the NAV. And I would point out, I posted something just yesterday as well, that for all of this, the premium to NAV that MicroStrategy has averaged has been right around the levels we are today, about 1.8. We put this trade on and advise clients somewhere between 2.2 and 2.3. But it's traded at 1, and it's traded as high as 3.5.
Where do you think it should be?
It should be at 1. I mean, I just think because for all the advantages he claims, you have what we call agency risk in finance. You have the fact that he could do something to the detriment of shareholders, and of course, we're not calculating any deferred taxes in our NAV, which theoretically there would be if he sold Bitcoin.
So the other argument that people make is that the average MicroStrategy shareholder is not a tourist. These are diehards who eat downside volatility for breakfast. That's what they say on social media.
Yeah.
How long are you prepared to wait for this trade to play out?
You have to stop listening to all social media, Scarlett, because if you do a simple calculation of share turnover, how often does MicroStrategy turn its share base over? The last we looked, it was something like 4 weeks. So the average MicroStrategy share trades every 4 weeks. That's not a long-term investor. This is one of the most actively traded speculation vehicles in the market.
So there are other companies that are following MicroStrategy's approach, right? The Bitcoin treasury strategy overall. GameStop, DJT, the president's media company. Does that mean that there are comparable big short opportunities for those specific names as well?
Well, you're pointing to another catalyst. So the catalyst is this is a Me Too trade, right? There are other companies can do it. There's nothing proprietary about Michael Saylor's business model, right? He's simply buying Bitcoin, which is a highly liquid asset that trades everywhere. So yes, other companies have now looked at this and said, we can do this too, and we can issue equity to become a Bitcoin treasury company. And the more and more supply we're going to see, the less and less premium anybody's going to have.
Jim, I'm going to wrap this up and ask you one final question to kind of put everything in perspective. Are the economy and stock market as strong as they seem to appear? You've got a resilient consumer, you've got tame inflation, you've got stellar profits, and you've got stocks near record highs.
Yeah, I mean, everything looks good. I think that valuations are back up to their high levels. And what we're keeping our eye on, again, is issuance. We're looking at supply. I always keep joking that Wall Street has a printing press, too, and the printing press is starting to gear up.
It's worrying away. All right, Jim Chanos, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. President and founder of Chanos & Company. Kelly and Joe, I'll send it back to you in D.C.
All right, Scarlett Fu, thank you so much. Joined for a wide-ranging conversation by Jim Chanos. Pretty incredible to have him and Michael Saylor back-to-back on 2 days here on Bloomberg Television and radio. But of course, his remarks going well beyond Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. Also interesting to hear from him on Elon Musk, who I believe he just described as one big never mind after Elon Musk's post on social media that he regrets some of his previous posts about President Trump. They went, to use his words, too far.
They're making up, it seems. At least the president received the comments well and said he was pleased to hear that from Elon Musk. I don't know if they're going to end up in the Oval Office again together anytime soon. We're watching Wall Street as we get ready for another conversation that we're going to be bringing you here on Bloomberg with the chief financial officer at General Motors. Kaylee, the markets have been keeping an ear on Scott Bessent in testimony, and it looks like we're getting a bit of a lift. So we want to check in with Charlie Pellet at World Headquarters in New York for an update on the markets here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Charlie, how's it look?
Right now, the equity market is moving higher. A fourth month of surprisingly benign inflation drove bond yields down. Wall Street investors seeing greater leeway for the Fed to cut rates should trade friction slow the economy. Right now, we have got the S&P higher by just about 13 points. That is a gain of 0.2%. The Dow up 225, now up 0.5. NASDAQ up 27. That was a gain of 0.1%. The 10-year 4.40%, with the 2-year currently yielding 3.95%. The consumer price index, excluding food and energy, increased 0.1% from April. Again, the 10-year 4.41%. Gold a little changed right now, up $1 the ounce, 33.24. Crude is surging 2.9%, 66.85 for a barrel of WTI, and Bitcoin down 0.2%. Bitcoin right now 109,974 on Bitcoin. MicroStrategy, a stock we were just talking about, down 0.5%. A headline from the Bloomberg: Amazon to reorganize its grocery business. That, according to the Insider, Amazon shares right now down 0.8%. Recapping stocks higher. S&P up 0.2%. Back we go to Washington. Balance of power continues, and once again, your hosts here they are, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, Charlie. We'll get back together here in a couple to see how the trading day is progressing here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew, indeed, alongside Kaylee Lyons, as we bring you a slightly different series of conversations today, sticking in New York. And a great pleasure to bring in our colleague, Matt Miller, who sits down with the chief financial officer, executive vice president of General Motors. Matt, take it away.
Yeah, Joe, Kaylee, thanks very much. And I also have to say, it's great to be on my favorite show on Bloomberg TV. So I watch Balance of Power every day, and it's really cool to take part in it. Paul, we're talking to you. I'm normally focused on automaking as a business. It's now very closely related to the kind of stuff that Joe and Kaylee talk about every day because of the tariffs. You've announced a $4 billion investment, or plans to invest $4 billion over the next 2 years, bringing production back to America. This is essentially what Donald Trump is pushing for. This is what he wants companies to do, and now you're actually making it work. How much is this going to offset the $5 billion worth of hits GM is expected to take from the tariffs?
Well, Matt, first of all, thanks for having us. I think, this announcement that we made is worth much more than just the tariff side of it. The tariffs are obviously a piece of it as we're reacting to the new dynamic that's going to be out there. And it'll offset a good bit of it. So we'll move about 300,000 units of production. Some of it is new production and incremental. Some of it is a shift, but re-optimizing our manufacturing footprint and taking advantage of some underutilized capacity in the U.S. But it's also about, creating security for our people. You look at the Orion plant, we would tailor that to produce and scale EVs really fast. The market has obviously changed and pivoted a little bit. This gives us an opportunity to reallocate that plant, better utilize it for internal combustion engines on trucks and full-size SUVs, where we know the demand is really strong for them. And that's great for our utilization, our efficiency, as well as for our consumers and our people as well. So it's about more than just tariffs, but with this will be about 2 million vehicles produced in the U.S. for the U.S., and we're continuing to make those investments.
I bought a Silverado ZR2 a couple of years ago. Mine came out of Mexico. You're going to be moving most of that production, I guess, to the U.S., right? Most Sierra production to the U.S. Equinox production, does that come mostly to the U.S. too? What are we seeing in terms of the models that are moving out of Mexico?
Yeah, we'll have Equinox ICE production in Spring Hill. In Fairfax. Spring Hill is going to be the Blazer. But Fairfax is going to be another great implementation of where we're going to be able to produce ICE and EVs on the same production line, creating that flexibility for us to be able to respond to consumer demand as it continues to grow.
Have you changed sourcing for any of the parts? Because it's not obviously just about the final assembly with these vehicles. There's a ton of content, and you want to have that, I guess, as much domestically sourced as possible as well to save on costs.
Well, I think, with what the administration has set up here with the MSRP offsets is giving us time to help retool our supply chain. So incentivizing growth and production in the U.S., recognizing that the supply chain takes time to shift. So we're going to continue to work with our supply base to try to maximize the efficiencies across the entire value chain and utilize those offsets where we need to and shift production where it makes sense and where we're able to.
I should say to save on tariff costs, because you obviously source a lot of these parts outside of the U.S. Because the actual production costs are lower. How much higher is it? How much more expensive is it to build a part like an engine or a transmission to assemble a truck in the U.S. than it is, say, in Mexico?
Well, it's far more complex than that, Matt, because, there's obviously the hourly labor differential, and that's a big piece of it. But we can save money in logistics. We can save money in plant utilization and filling up capacity. So when you fill up a plant, it actually makes it more efficient for every vehicle out there, not just the ones that you're moving production into. So we look at that as an enterprise-wide calculation and think we can get to an equivalency where ultimately we can be competitive with producing in the U.S. as well.
One of the things that you can produce fewer of in the U.S. is magnets, the rare earth minerals that we've all learned much more about than we ever expected to in the last week or so. How is your access to those rare earths right now? Because there's concern that production in a lot of U.S. factories could slow.
Yeah, we haven't experienced any slowdown as of yet. It's clearly a risk that everybody is watching from that standpoint. But what I would say is our supply chain team does an excellent job, similar to what they did through the chip crisis, semiconductor shortage that we had a few years ago. Our team did a great job of responding, maintaining agility, working with our suppliers to try to balance production as best we can. And they've done a great job so far with this situation as well.
What is your thought on any kind of vertical integration? I mean, the concern or the problem, I guess, with rare earths isn't just the mining, but also the refining of them is mostly done in China. Have you tried to convince suppliers to do more of that here? Are you trying to get your own supply here?
We've done a number of initiatives, whether it's with Lithium Americas or a joint venture with POSCO around a lot of battery raw materials, particularly the lithium side, which is a little bit easier to do and a little bit less capital intensive. But we've helped fund that. We've taken equity positions. We've helped to fund products and projects across the board. But we've been working on this for a long time, really since COVID, is trying to increase the resiliency of our supply chain, both from a pandemic, from just a de-risking perspective, and we're in a pretty good situation with where we are. We still have some work to do, but there's a lot of things that we can do thinking creatively with our partners.
What are you thinking about prices right now? You obviously raise prices on a regular basis, right? If we're not experiencing deflation, you're going to try and stick with the pack there. there. Are you facing pushback from consumers when you try and raise prices?
Well, our portfolio has performed really, really well, and we've adopted a strategy of being very disciplined in our production, not overproducing like some of the challenges of the past, and that's a strategy that's worked for us. We announced on our earnings call about 6 weeks ago that we don't need to take any price to help with the offset initiatives that we've targeted going forward, because we want to be in the position where we're responding to demand from our customers and being more stable. We don't want to raise prices because of tariffs, and then when tariffs come down, expect that prices are going to come back down. We want to be more consistent with our customer base, and that's a strategy that's worked really well for us.
Can you do it in other ways through MSRP? I mean, some manufacturers are raising maybe a delivery price. You can also raise the price of options packages and still keep MSRP level.
Well, again, we haven't done anything specific to respond to tariffs. We've looked at where packages are for options, where our logistics costs are, et cetera, and we try to price what we can. But that's irrespective of tariffs, and it's something that we've done. I think when you look at our pricing model over the last few years, it's been more consistent than many of our competitors with less volatility and discounting, and that's good for our customers as well. So we're going to continue to do that across the board where we can, and make sure that we're delivering value for our customers.
The bean counters at Bloomberg Intelligence want me to ask questions about cash flow here and how that looks right now with the tariff effect. You've had obviously great sales, as I guess some demand is pulled forward. Do you have to divert some cash, though, to deal with tariffs from anything else?
Well, I mean, clearly in the short and intermediate term, tariffs are going to be a drain on our cash flow. We announced about $4 to $5 billion of impact this year, and we think we can offset about 30% of it going forward. But that is going to be a cash hit. Now, when you look at the performance of the company, our cash flow generation has been really strong. It'll continue to be really strong even after the tariffs, and we're going to work to continue to drive that efficiency. But we've got to create that stable cash flow across the board, because this is still a cyclical industry, and we need to be able to absorb these shocks. And I think the team's done a really good job of managing and being disciplined in order to continue to drive strong cash flow, even in the face of some of these short to intermediate term hits.
What are you expecting in terms of SAR? Because we've had pretty strong sales numbers over the past couple of months. I think upwards of 17.3 million. Does that continue through the rest of the year?
No, we don't expect it to. We would love to see that happen. But, what we said about 6 weeks ago is we're planning for a year of about 16 million units, which is similar to last year. In April and the first half of May, we were trending much closer to 18 million, as we saw a lot of customers trying to get ahead of what they expected to be price increases. We've seen that come out over the last couple of weeks, but it's really retreated back to where it was before that pull-ahead demand. So we're encouraged by the fact that that consistent demand is still there, and that's going to be important for us as we continue to push forward. But if we see a slowdown, we'll have to adjust to it and make sure that we create that agility that we have really come to be known for over the last few years. But right now, the customer seems pretty stable, even though we've seen that pull-ahead demand come out.
You've had the best margins of the big three, enjoyed, I think, 8.5% margins or thereabouts. Does it hang at that level through 2025?
Well, obviously, the tariffs are going to be an operating hit to us going forward, which is why we're focused on making sure we take actions quickly. There were a number of actions that we already took. We called them no regrets actions, where we increased the line rate in Fort Wayne to build more trucks in the U.S., et cetera. Here, we're taking the next step of deploying capital to increase that production. These are steps that we think are necessary for us for the long term to be able to drive that type of consistent margin performance that we want to be known for.
I want to ask about the shares as well as your free float. It's gotten pretty small. How much further can you go with buybacks?
Well, I mean, we're going to continue to follow our disciplined capital allocation policy. The first thing we do is reinvest in the business. That's a capital budget of about $10 to $11 billion. We just announced last night that that'll be $10 to $12 billion for 26 and 27, reflecting a little bit of additional spend for what we're doing. The second is we prioritize the balance sheet. The balance sheet's been as strong as it's been in decades, with a pension fund that's nearly fully funded and debt that's very manageable. And then the third leg of that stool was returning cash to shareholders. So we reinstated the dividend a couple of years ago, and we've been deploying that cash to return to our shareholders to make sure that all the constituencies benefit from the success that we've been having, our employees, our customers, and our shareholders.
Paul, it's been great having some time with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much
for joining us here at
Appreciate the
7:31. Lex, with that, Joe and Kaylee, I'll toss it back to you in Washington.
All right, Bloomberg's Matt Miller. Thank you so much. Great to have you here on Balance of Power. We appreciate Matt's interview and his fandom of the show. He, of course, joined there by Paul Jacobson, the CFO of General Motors, beginning the conversation specifically on the $4 billion that the automaker is planning to invest in its U.S. plants over the next 2 years, investments that will expand factories in Kansas, Tennessee, and in Michigan, specifically in Lake Orion, Michigan, which happens to fall in the congressional district of Republican Congresswoman Lisa McClain, the chair of the House Republican Conference, who is joining us now live from Capitol Hill on Bloomberg TV and radio. Chairman McClain, we appreciate your time. When we consider that GM says that these investments in aggregate will add between 3,000 and 4,000 U.S. jobs, how many of those are you expecting to be at home in your district?
Just a little over 2,300 jobs for Lake Orion. It is a huge investment for that community. We are extremely excited, and the economic impact that it's going to have is obvious, right? Not just with the Lake Orion plant, but right with the coffee shops and the new homes and all the money going back into the economy in Lake Orion. Huge. But also it provides a lot of hope for our community in my district. And if I can just say, this isn't just another example of President Trump promises made, promises kept. He told you he was going to bring manufacturing back to America and jobs back to America. And thank you for bringing it back to my home state and my district in Lake Orion. So we're very excited.
Well, it's great to have you back, Congresswoman, and thanks for your patience. I know you were listening to that interview with the CFO at General Motors, and I want to just go a bit further into the labor picture here before we ask you some other questions about this. Michigan has an unemployment rate of 5.5%, and I wonder if you have the labor pool now, if this will require training, or there are unemployed workers from the business who can move right into these positions.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a combination of both, and I haven't seen all the details yet, meaning, you know, I don't think there's going to be 2,300 jobs that start tomorrow afternoon, so I think it's going to be a combination. I think we have the workforce, but I think we're going to have to do some investing and retooling, so to speak, on training of these jobs. But Michiganders are resilient. We have a good partner with GM. We have a good partner with the local officials in the local community of Lake Orion, that we're going to be able to get this done to make sure that we can get the plant up and running as soon as possible with skilled workers.
Well, and for all of the economic benefit that you are expecting from this investment, of course, part of the reason companies like GM are looking at more onshoring is because of the tariff regime the president has put into place. To what extent do you expect the positive economic effects of that might be offset by higher costs that could result from the said tariffs?
You know, the said tariffs are exactly what you said, the said tariffs. And I know there's a lot of uncertainty around right now, but they're not set in stone. So I think the tariffs, as I said many times before, is a negotiation tool to renegotiate our trade deals and bring manufacturing and jobs back to America. So I don't know what the effect is going to be. I believe that there could be a possibility that we see a reduction in the tariffs. I mean, look at the deal that we just, the president just signed with China, not to mention the other 80 countries that have come to the table to renegotiate trade deals. So I'm optimistic that it will offset a lot, but maybe there won't even be that much to offset because the tariffs are being used effectively as a negotiation tool.
Yeah, we should note that we are waiting for that deal, the framework at least, that was announced to be formalized and approved by President Xi. But I know as well that you're crediting President Trump's trade policies here for this investment and the shift to the U.S. We know as well that General Motors is confirming that it has no plans to produce electric vehicles at the Orion plant. These are going to be gas-only vehicles following the retooling. Is that also a response to President Trump's approach, or is it a response to customer demand?
Well, I think you heard the gentleman on before Paul say it is a demand, right? I don't know that it's as much a retaliation or whatever word you use. I think it is more a reflection on the demand of what consumers want. President Trump, I don't think, cares what type of vehicle you drive, whether it's an electric vehicle or whether it's a gas-powered vehicle. He just wants the American people to be able to choose. And I think what you see from GM is without those subsidies, you're seeing the demand from consumers saying, hey, we prefer a gas-powered vehicle. You can still buy an electric vehicle, but the demand is for the ICE engines. And that's exactly how the free markets are supposed to work. Supply and demand should matter.
Well, we know Elon Musk has had some strong feelings around this whole conversation around EVs and those tax credits being rolled back, which may have inspired possibly, or at least fed into some of the social media posts we saw from him in recent days. Posts that he has since said went too far, according to his post from earlier today, that he regrets some of the things he said specifically about President Trump. And the New York Times just reporting, Chairwoman McClain, that Elon Musk did call Trump on Monday night before making that I regret post. But considering the things, in addition to commenting about Donald Trump specifically, that he's been railing against, or this one big beautiful bill that you have been advocating for vocally, is this an apology that you would accept? Do you think the president should?
Yeah, I think they are. Listen, the president is a very smart man, and Elon Musk is a very smart man. What did we think was going to happen when you have the most powerful man in the world and one of the richest men in the world? Is I think sometimes your emotions get the best of you, and they're both businessmen. They both care about the country and doing what's best. So I think this will be put to bed rather quickly, and actually it has been put to bed rather quickly. So I'm optimistic. Let bygones be bygones, and let's focus on what's best for the American people.
Well, does getting over this help passage of the reconciliation bill? I know it's coming back your way. Likely with changes in the Senate, Congresswoman, and there were concerns that some of the fiscal hawks might have been paying attention to Elon Musk, urging them to vote no.
Yeah. Well, I think it doesn't hurt. Does it help? I think every little bit helps, right? And at the end of the day, I think we're going to get it back. I know the Senate is going to put their fingerprints on it. They've already told us they're going to put their fingerprints on it. My hope is that they don't change it too dramatically, because we have a very thin margin, and we worked for almost a year and had our family fights, family squabbles, family disagreements on this to put the best, most conservative package on the floor. So again, I'm optimistic that we'll get this done, hopefully by July 4th.
Well, and when we consider those Senate changes, we understand that Chairman Crapo in the Senate, who leads the Finance Committee, of course, is going to be briefing Republican senators about the changes he's looking to make this afternoon. Which one do you fear most that you've heard rumor of that could diminish the chances of it repassing in the House?
I hope they don't touch SALT too much. And the reason why I say that is because the SALT caucus, which we have here in the House and they don't have in the Senate for obvious reasons, they've been pretty dug in. And I'm not here to say they're right. I'm not here to say they're wrong. But they've been pretty dug in. And that was one of our biggest issues in the House. That just can't be touched. That would be the biggest. Yeah, that'll be the biggest problem if they touch SALT, I believe. And Medicaid, obviously, which I don't think they're going to.
We've got our eyes on the New York, New Jersey, California delegations. Congresswoman, it's great to have you. And thanks again for being with us live from Capitol Hill. Lisa McClain is chairwoman of the House Republican Conference. And a great update there, real-time information, Kaylee. She picked SALT. Isn't that something as the answer? This is what's keeping them up at night right now.
Yeah, which is why the details of whatever Chairman Crapo has to say about the changes they're looking at are so important, considering senators, including the majority leader, John Thune, have not been shy about saying that the Senate doesn't care at all about SALT, at least on the GOP side.
We've come around all together again for Matt Miller. I hope that he was listening to that. With Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. We're going to bring in Anna Wong coming up next, but first we want to check the markets. Let's get up to speed on Wall Street right now with the help of Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey,
Hi, thank you very much. Here's what's going on. CPI Wednesday, choppy trading right now. We got the Dow, the S&P, they both remain higher. NASDAQ just dipping lower right now. NASDAQ down 7, little change there, down under 0.1%. The S&P 500 index holding on to a 4% 12-point gain right now. The S&P up under 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 177 on the Dow, a gain there of 0.4%. Our Mag 7 index, though, down 0.3%. 10-year 4.41%. The 2-year right now at 3.93%. A fourth month of surprisingly benign inflation driving bond yields down. Spot gold, little changed, 33.23 the ounce, down less than 0.1%, while crude is now surging 3.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude back above $67 a barrel, 67.05. Repeating an earlier headline, Elon Musk called President Trump Monday night before that regret post. That, according to the New York Times. You'll recall in that post on X, Musk expressed regret over his recent post about President Trump, saying, quote, "They went too far." And just getting word that the U.S. Embassy in Iraq is preparing for an ordered departure. This is according to Reuters, which says the embassy in Iraq is facing heightened security risks. Again, developing story that we are keeping an eye on. Recapping, S&P up now by 1 point. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Limes.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, looking at the market reaction to today's CPI data. Thank you so much. That data, of course, coming in cool for the fourth consecutive month, with underlying U.S. inflation rising just 0.1% in May. That was less than estimates as we look at that data at 8:30 a.m. and then the testimony that began at 10 a.m. and, by the way, is still going with the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. This is something he seems to be pretty proud of today. He called this data specifically fantastic.
So this isn't Biden data anymore.
I guess not.
I guess that's right, though. He had the wind at his back when he walked into the Ways and Means Committee room. A good story to tell from the White House. Let's see if Anna Wong agrees. Bloomberg Economics chief U.S. economist joins us now live. Anna, is that the full story? Because the headline reads pretty well for this White House.
Well, so I think you can certainly see it glass half full like Bessent does. But what the signal is telling us from today's report is that consumers are beginning to see their income prospect dwindle. And that's why they're pulling back on traveling, on booking hotels, and on, buying cars. Typically in a economic slowdown environment, those two categories, cars and travel, are exactly the stuff that people first pull back on. So I think what this just soft data is telling us, that the economy is slowing.
Well, so Anna, to expand on that a little further, are you suggesting basically that the data is not so much telling us that companies and businesses aren't passing on higher costs due to tariffs, but that they can't exercise that pricing power, that consumers are not going to be particularly tolerant of it?
So what it is that the firms actually have been passing through some tariffs. We noticed that appliances and some of the more tariff exposed categories have been seeing a pickup in inflation. But more than offsetting that is this deflation in many travels sectors, such as airfares and hotels. So I think now is a good time to travel and book hotels if one has slack in their budget. But otherwise, I think this tariff pass-through that everybody has been waiting for is actually happening. And my team does scrape online prices. And those online prices are showing that in the next couple of months, home appliances like your toasters, microwaves are going to see a significant price increase.
Interesting. Anna, we're watching testimony continue with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, now approaching hour 4 before the House Ways and Means Committee. I don't know if this man ever sleeps. He's going to be talking later before the Senate as well. And speaking to what he has described as the economic benefits and the growth engine that would be this reconciliation bill, the president's big, beautiful bill, if passed. Listen to what he said about cutting red tape, and we'll have you weigh in.
The One Big Beautiful Bill will also incentivize unprecedented investment in U.S. manufacturing. The legislation will provide 100% expensing for new factories, as well as existing factories that expand operations and support Made in America. It will streamline burdensome permitting processes that often stand in the way of new manufacturing projects.
And when you combine the cutting of red tape, the permitting reform, along with the incentives. This is the kind of thing that the CBO, to the detriment of the White House, doesn't include in its scoring. Is he correct about what comes next?
I think there are some evidence to suggest that American firms are increasingly thinking about onshoring some manufacturing activities. ISM Manufacturing releases survey results twice every year, and it shows that many of the metallic firms and even apparel firms are thinking about increasing operations in the U.S. So surely there are some evidence pointing to that, and also the deregulation on energy prices will lower costs. But at the same time, we're seeing 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, which are key inputs in building factories in the U.S. So what is the net impact? I think that's harder to quantify.
Well, and finally, Anna, I would like to ask you about the Fed, because, of course, President Trump had some thoughts about what the Fed should do in the aftermath of this data today. He posted on Truth Social, CPI just out, great numbers, and reiterates his call for the Fed to lower 1 full point. I know you aren't in the camp that the Fed's getting ready to move 100 basis points, but does the data today make it potentially more likely we see a 25 basis point cut sooner than expected?
I don't think so, because what this data shows you is still the impact, net negative impact from the April Liberation Day tariffs. And the paradox of tariffs is that if they go really, really high, they could be deflationary because the pullback in income expectations is just so steep. And that's what we're seeing today. But the de-escalation in Geneva and thereafter has really bolstered the stock market. And we expect that in July CPI print, we're going to see a boost from financial easing of financial conditions, as well as those home appliances price increase that I was just telling you about.
All right, Anna Wong, we appreciate it, as always. Our chief U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics joining us here on Balance of Power. Thank you so much. And Joe, as we wrap up this hour of Balance of Power, we should note the Treasury Secretary is still going at it in the House Ways and Means Committee, about to hit 4 hours after his late night, early morning trip back from London trade negotiations. And when we come back to air later today at 5 p.m., he's still going to be testifying just in the other chamber because he has the Senate next.
Yeah, you think maybe they'd give him like a day off or something after that, but he had to leave the talks last evening to get on a plane. He said goodbye to Anne-Marie Hordern in London and showed up this morning in Washington. So we'll keep tabs if he makes more news on this. Of course, President is watching as well here, and we'll have more on the late edition. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Yep, we'll get more takes on this economic data from the White House with Stephen Myron of the Council of Economic Advisors, and the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, will weigh in on oil prices as well. We have a big show coming up.
That's for sure.
So we'll see you then when we reconvene at 5 p.m. In the meantime, Bloomberg Business Week Daily is straight ahead right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Bloomberg Radio brings you influential voices on the stories that matter. House Speaker Mike Johnson.
A strong America is good for the whole world, and that is what we are going to bring about.
Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai.
I'm confident there is a company that's going to be created with AI.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang.
Without American technology, the availability of Chinese technology will fail the market.
The names that matter on the news you need. Listen on Bloomberg Radio or anytime on the Bloomberg Talks podcast.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Cheaper prices at the gas pump and a lot of companies choosing to not pass along tariff costs to consumers, at least not yet. That led to a softer than forecast read on inflation last month, rising just 0.1% from April, up 2.8% from May of last year. And that, with the U.S. and China saying both countries have agreed to a framework of a trade deal, stocks this hour are higher. Right now, the Dow is up little more than 0.5%. The NASDAQ up about 0.1%. The S&P 500 0.25% higher. DoorDash is buying the advertising tech firm Symbiosis for $175 million to bolster its advertising business, which currently generates more than $1 billion a year from restaurants and consumer brands. And the donut giant Krispy Kreme is now out of the cookie business. It's selling its remaining stake in the Insomnia cookie chain for $75 million. Krispy Kreme says it's going to use that money to pay down its massive debt load. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Surveillance, your home for insight on international relations. With guests like Yale Law School senior fellow Stephen Roach.
China is still heavily dependent on exports.
Brown University professor Wendy Schiller.
The president cannot just create immigration law.
And Nicholas Burns, former U.S. ambassador to China.
We have to count on our allies, and we have to be respectful of our allies.
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekday mornings at 7 Eastern. On YouTube, the Bloomberg Business app, and always on Bloomberg Radio.
The biggest business story of our time revolves around one name, Elon Musk. On the latest episode of Elon Inc., we talk about Elon and Trump.
I do wonder if Elon is sort of a combination of like one of these Trump advisors who were sort of chewed up and spit out by the White House and a world leader. You know, Elon is part Scaramucci and part Kim Jong-un.
From Bloomberg Business Week, this is Elon Inc. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The global leader in business and financial news is now live on YouTube.
The live chat yesterday was very kind.
Watch Bloomberg Radio all day.
There are no such things as slow news days.
For market news, conversation, and insight from Bloomberg's signature radio shows, Surveillance, Bloomberg Intelligence, Balance of Power, and Business Week.
This story is among our most read.
Bloomberg Radio. Watch us every business day live on YouTube. Go to the Bloomberg podcast page and click on the live feed. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
I always had to be so good, no one could ignore me. Carve my path with data and drive. But some people only see who I am on paper. The paper ceiling, the limitations from degree screens to stereotypes that are holding back over 70 million stars. Workers skilled through alternative routes rather than a bachelor's degree. It's time for skills to speak for themselves. Find resources for breaking through barriers at tailorpaperceiling.org. Brought to you by Opportunity at Work and the Ad Council.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg Television and Radio and streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Nora Melinda alongside my co-host, David Gura. We're both filling in for Tim Stenivek and Carol Masser, who are off today. Here's the setup at this hour on this lovely Wednesday afternoon. Stocks are climbing after U.S. inflation data rose less than forecast for the fourth straight month in a row. Now, uncertainty over global trade continues to impact corporate America's profit outlook. Some analysts are even warning that negative developments could reignite broad market volatility.
Well, still ahead, Jeffrey Gundlach, the CEO of DoubleLine, is going to be in conversation with Lisa Abramowitz. She's at the Bloomberg Global Credit Forum in Hollywood, California. We'll get to her in just a few minutes.
She'll also be speaking with Danielle Poli, the managing director of Oaktree Capital Management.
And the IPO market seems to be ticking up. Voyager Technology CEO Dylan Taylor is the firm's CEO. He's going to join us to talk about that firm's debut on the New York Stock Exchange. First here, let's get a check on the day's trade and top business stories with our very own Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. Here's what's going on. We got the Dow higher right now. Dow Jones Industrial average up 132. That is a gain of index in the red right now. Trading lower, we got the S&P down 3, little change there. Down the Nasdaq Composite Index lower by 44, decline of 0.2%. The 10-year currently yielding 4.41%, 4.41 on the 10-year. Fourth month of surprisingly benign U.S. inflation data. The 2-year 3.95%. Gold flat on the day, 33.24 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 3.5% now. 67.24 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much to our very own Charlie Pellet. Now, underlying U.S. inflation rose in May by less than forecast for the fourth month in a row. Now, this print suggests that companies are largely holding back on passing on higher tariff costs to U.S. consumers. CPI, the Consumer Price Index, ticked higher by about 0.1% from the previous month, and that's according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Michael McKee is Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent, and he's joining us here in the Bloomberg Business Week Daily Studio. So consumers, as it seems, Mike, are continuing to pay attention to what's coming out of Washington?
Consumers are continuing to pay attention, but this is a sort of happy surprise, I suppose, for the administration. I'm not sure how consumers feel about it. Now, gasoline prices, we know, have gone down for a couple months in a row, and the impact on the consumer price index was exaggerated by the fact that they seasonally adjust the numbers. Gas prices, as we follow it on the AAA daily index, were down 1% during the month, but when they translate that into the CPI, they were down 2.8%. So that put a lot of weight down on the overall rate of inflation. But also food prices went up. And so food prices were up 0.4. So, you know, it's mixed news for the consumer at home. They're paying less to drive to the grocery store to pay more. The good news there for Donald Trump is that egg prices went down.
Well, that's great.
Let's stick with that. And to borrow a phrase from Charlie Pellet, surprisingly benign data. How are we to interpret all of this? We've heard so much about the soft data, sentiment data, survey data, so much worry expressed in those metrics. You see this and you wonder, is this just not getting through to the way that consumers are actually buying goods and services?
There isn't a particular explanation for what happened in the month, but I think there are a couple of ones that make sense. One is that a lot of retailers were selling out of inventories. We pulled so much stuff in imports in January and February and March that they had bulging stock rooms and didn't have to raise prices. Another explanation is that for a lot of goods, it's possible that companies absorbed some of the cost in their margins because they didn't want to lose customers in case the tariffs went away. And we have really no idea what Donald Trump's doing even now. And so that's another reason as well. And then because they were just getting established, it's also possible that some companies just decided they weren't going to raise, some wholesalers decided they maybe were not going to raise prices. The bet of economists is that this is a 1 month thing, and we're going to see prices for June and July and onward go higher.
Well, Mike, you mentioned the presidential administration, and this morning, Vice President J.D. Vance joined President Trump in urging the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. And now we have U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent being floated as a potential Fed chair replacement. Now, we've got the Fed decision next Wednesday, coming up next week. What's the latest on rate cut expectations, and what's the energy like right now in Washington?
There's no rate cut expectation, certainly not for next week, and probably not for July as well, because, again, this is a 1 month thing. Tomorrow we'll get PPI. We'll see if there are wholesale price pressures building, and my guess is we'll see more there than we saw in CPI. But it doesn't matter who the president appoints to become chair. They're just one of 7 votes on the board and 19 votes overall on the committee. And this president can only appoint 2 members unless somebody dies or resigns before the end of his term. So he can't really change the composition of the board, and the board is going to stick to the Fed's strong belief in keeping prices under control. So I don't think anybody's going to be able to come in and wave a wand and cut rates by a full percentage point. It wouldn't make any sense. Now, if the economy slows down, or even if the economy grows at a reasonable pace and inflation continues to go down, we could see rate cuts. That's the Chris Waller argument. The good news rate cut, as he calls it, by the end of the year. But the Fed's going to wait as long as possible to make sure that they're not reacting in the wrong direction too early.
On that note, you read a lot of notes from economists on Wall Street, elsewhere, as I do. Is there a consensus forming, as you see it, for when it's going to be long enough, when you think the Fed is likely to move?
The consensus is December, basically, at this point. Although the markets go back and forth, I don't put any stock in the Fed funds futures trading now, because every headline, every speech, every tweet from the White House moves those around.
It's more dynamic than it used to be.
I don't think it tells you a whole lot. But the consensus of people who watch it is basically the Fed can wait until December under current conditions because they feel they're tight. So if inflation still hasn't gotten to 2%, they're in a pretty good place. If the economy slows down a lot, unemployment goes up, then they might have to cut rates sooner. But the question is really less about when they would move, but it's when they would have enough information to make a decision to move. And that probably doesn't come maybe until September, once we get the June and July numbers, and we see more of the effect of tariffs. And of course, the president's reciprocal tariffs, we don't know until July 9th is the deadline, is when the delay comes off. So even if we get some kind of new tariffs, then we still aren't going to have an effect for a couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Mike, super quickly, in about 20 seconds or less, how would you describe the U.S. consumer right now?
They're not as unhappy as the surveys would suggest, because we're still seeing them go out shopping. But I think they're worried about what could happen. They are backing off a little bit of that because there's been a lot of warnings from us and others about inflation and about the economy slowing down and the impact of tariffs, but none of that has really hit yet. And so until that does, probably they are going to change their behavior a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Our thanks, as always, to Mike McKee, Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent.
That was the latest on the economy. I want to turn now to the markets, and our colleague Lisa Bromwitz is in Hollywood, California. She's there for a conversation with Jeffrey Gundlach. We're going to talk to her in just a few moments here. She's been at the Bloomberg Global Credit Conference, which has been taking place there over the course of the day. Jeffrey Gundlach, of course, at DoubleLine, the CEO and the CIO of that company, known as Bond Market Royalty. Bond Market King, I think, was the name that he has enjoyed for a long while. But just a fascinating conference that's taken place, Nora, over the course of the day. We've heard some really big names in global credit.
Most definitely. I mean, it's a lot of big names that we've got going on over there. But I'm also looking at what's going on in markets today. I mean, I'm seeing markets that are mixed right now. We've got the S&P 500 down about 0.2%, NASDAQ down about 0.4%, and Dow up about 0.1%, excuse me.
As promised, our colleague Lisa Bromwitz, co-anchor of Bloomberg Surveillance in Hollywood, California, for a conversation with Jeffrey Gundlach, CEO and CIO of DoubleLine. Lisa, over to you.
Rearrange the outlook for credit investing more broadly. And I want to start there, considering the fact that you've talked about how the U.S. is going to go bankrupt and how it's on an unsustainable fiscal path. Are we seeing that priced in, or is there still a reckoning to come?
Well, it's certainly behaving differently than it was for the last 4 decades. I mean, what we've seen is in the last 15 years, there's been a number of corrections on the S&P 500. And in every single one of them, when the S&P goes down more than 10%, the dollar index, the trade-weighted dollar index goes up. This time, the dollar went down when the S&P 500 went down almost 20%. That's strange. Things are behaving differently. Usually when the Fed starts cutting interest rates, rates across the yield curve go down. The 10-year Treasury almost always goes up immediately following the first Fed rate cut, and then it keeps rallying for a while. This time, the 10-year yield went up, and the yield curve is steepening. So I think what we have is a recognition that the interest expense for the United States is untenable if we continue running a $2.1 trillion budget deficit and we continue to have sticky interest rates. One thing that people fail to appreciate is how much the average Treasury payment has gone up. The average yield, the average coupon on Treasuries was below 2%. The entire Treasury market, all 30-odd billion of it, you average it all together. Some of them are old, they were issued with higher interest rates, but it was below 2%. Now it's pushing 4%. And as long as bonds are maturing, and there's trillions and trillions of dollars of them maturing, a lot of them were issued back in, 2009, 2008, these other time periods. Even if you just issued them in 2019, some of these are starting to come due. And they were issued with coupons of 0.25%. And now it's 4.25%. So it's 400 basis points higher. So this problem continues to build. And there's an awareness now that the long-term Treasury bond is not a legitimate flight to quality asset. It's not responding to lower interest rates. It's not really responding to an inflation rate, which is now 2.5%. Probably going to go higher on the inflation rate because the ones that are rolling off from a year ago I mean, the cumulative, I think, headline CPI that came out today, it was a 0.18, but the one that was rolling off, I think, was 0.1. And if you do the next 2 months, those 3 months together, that quarter, the cumulative rise from a year ago was 0.1. So we're likely seeing the low point in near-term inflation. So yeah, I think the reckoning is coming, is that we have to somehow figure out how we're going to deal with $37 trillion. I mean, we're actually going to hit the 37 trillion number for real. It's still 36.95 trillion, but it's going up quickly. So yeah, there's going to have to be some pretty creative thinking, and the market's starting to believe that. So the previous group talked about capital flows, and one of the reasons that the U.S. is underperforming at this point is so much money came into the United States since, say, 2015 or so, or 2005, and there was a net investment position. Foreigners were investing more in the U.S. than the U.S. was investing outside the country, to the tune of $3 trillion. That was about 15, 17 years ago. It's now over $25 trillion is the net investment position, and the dollar is falling. So it's not inconceivable that some of that $25 trillion that came in over just a couple of, not even 2 decades, could go out. And so this is a moment where finally you have the setup where non-US investment, even if you're a dollar-based investor, you should be thinking about increasing your allocations to non-dollar investments. And it's already working. It's already working.
So there's so much to unpack there. I want to talk about the idea that there could be this 25 trillion or some of it that moves away from the U.S.
Trillion.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
3 trillion. You're getting trillions of dollars moving out of U.S. assets.
Yeah.
How high or what kind of behavior do you have to see in the 30-year bond to like it again, given the fact that you've been very vocal
I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've come to the idea that as the Fed eases, and when the economy really does weaken more, the Treasury rate will continue to go up at the long end. And so for now, we're very uninvolved in the long-term Treasury bond. But there will come a moment where you have to pivot, because there's going to be a response. And I've got many ideas of what that response might be, but one of the leading candidates would be quantitative easing. So you get to a point where the rate is so uncomfortably high. What is that number? I'm going to guess 6%, where they say this is going to be something that we're going to be running a $5 trillion budget deficit with all this bond issuance when we go into a recession. And so they'll pivot. I believe this is a sensible idea. There's other ideas too, but the leading candidate is they will announce quantitative easing on buying long-term treasuries. And when they do, you have to very quickly, and hopefully you do it the day before they announce it, but we don't have access to the day before stuff. That's for the primary broker dealers. But you would need to buy long-term treasuries as much as you possibly could, because when that gets announced, it'll be just like when they announced buying corporate bonds in COVID, where all of a sudden the corporate bond market went from down 20 points to right back to where it started in just a matter of a few days. You could get a 20-point rally on the long bond if they announced that they're buying the long bond, because that would be a 100 basis point drop.
You said that if the Fed were to cut rates, that might cause a sell-off in 30-year treasuries.
It's already happening. They started cutting rates September of 2023, and the long bond has gone up in yield significally since then, 100 basis points.
And you think that will happen again?
Why not? I mean, it's a paradigm shift. We have a tremendous paradigm shift that's going on, where money is not coming into the United States, where the long bond is not a flight to quality asset. Gold suddenly is the flight to quality asset. People, I think Costco is selling gold retail and they can't keep it in stock, and gold has gone from, it was living at $1,800 an ounce not very long ago, and once it broke above 2,000, it was just straight up. And now it's basically a third of 10,000 3,333 and 33 cents it was actually when I looked at it yesterday. So I think gold is a real asset class. It's no longer for lunatic survivalists and wild speculators. It's viewed as an asset class, and central banks have been accumulating gold. Gold was stuck in the mud because for a decade or more, central banks were selling it down. They've bought it all back.
So are you buying gold?
I've owned gold since it was $300, and I also own some gold miners personally. But they bought it all back. It's amazing. They sold it at like $300, $400, and they're buying it back at $3,000. See, central banks are not very good long-term investors.
Well, maybe they could use advice from you. One thing that we've been hearing about in a number of the panels this morning has been about the corporate debt market. Yeah. And one thing that I've gathered from talking with people at DoubleLine and reading your outlooks is that you've reduced your allocation to below investment grade credit.
Systematically over a 2-year period.
To the lowest level, I believe, since the inception of DoubleLine.
Right. That's right. We have higher quality portfolios today relative to strategy style than at any time. We run closed-end funds that are leveraged. We have the lowest leverage of all time. We had 45% leverage versus net assets, and in one of our funds we're at 7%. And we're there because we want to be a liquidity provider when you get paid to be a liquidity provider, and you're not now. The spreads are very uninteresting in the credit market. Just as the valuation of the S&P 500 is incredibly uninteresting. You know, when we had the big sell-off in April, people were like, yeah, we were kind of asleep at the switch. The market was really overvalued. We really should have been thinking more cautiously. Well, it's more overvalued today because the S&P 500 is down 1 or 2%, and earnings estimates have been cut significantly. So if you look at the forward PE, it's higher now than it was at the all-time high back in February or early March.
So what are you sort of anticipating? What kind of
I anticipate a great buying opportunity. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's getting close. I feel that the environment feels a lot like 1999 relative to AI is just map over .com for AI. I also think it feels a lot like 2006, 2007. It's funny. One of the hardest things to do in the investment business is to learn and fully appreciate how long everything takes to happen. It takes forever for the problems to actually show up. It takes forever for the defaults to finally arrive. But people anticipate changes with great enthusiasm. So AI, of course, was embraced with great enthusiasm. Electricity was all the rage back in 1900 because people realized that electricity could change the world. And I think we can all agree electricity changed the world in ways that are bigger than AI will change the world, in my opinion. Electricity is like amazing. But there was a huge boom in electricity stocks in the first decade of the 20th century. But electricity stocks boomed so much that their relative performance peaked versus the stock market excluding electricity stocks in 1911. If you own electricity stocks, you've been underperforming the non-electricity stocks since 1911. That's a long time. And that's what happens. That happened with the dot-coms too. That was the 1999 thing. Sure, it turned out that some of those stocks were great investments, but that enthusiasm becomes very excessive. They see the possibilities, but it takes a long time for the possibilities to arrive. It's taking a long time for the tariffs to arrive.
So do you think that the tech stocks that have been outperforming are going to lag behind in terms of the 99 performance and sort of the corollary of all of the credit investments tied to the AI build-out also?
Yeah, it's a momentum trade, and momentum trades always overshoot on the upside. And then once the momentum's broken, the latecomers decide that their first loss is their best loss, and it turns into a seller's market.
You talk about 2006, 2007. That's a credit event. Mm-hmm. And when we took that poll that my colleague Danny was pointing to, private credit seemed to be the spot where people expect defaults to really pick up.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Do you think that that's sort of the epicenter of some of the risk?
Sure. The private credit is analogous private credit today is analogous to the CDO market in the mid part of the OOs, where there's just tremendous issuance, there's tremendous acceptance, there's all kinds of, I was listening briefly to kind of the private credit panel here, and there's a lot of phraseology that I heard that reminded me of CDO panels in 2006, 2007. Just complexity, illiquidity, I don't know, very large, tensions between investor classes. These things, private credit is extremely heavily invested in. Harvard University, who has a $53 billion endowment, supposedly, they had to come to the bond market twice because they didn't have enough money. They have $53 billion and they can't pay for repairs. They can't pay for operating expenses. They came to the bond market looking for $2.5 billion. I think they got $1.5 billion. And then they came back again, and I think it was last week it was announced that Harvard is thinking about selling some of their private equity interests at a discount, obviously, because when you're a forced seller, you're not going to get your cost. And so there's a lot of overinvestment. When I speak to RIAs, people that manage kind of higher net worth retail money, for the past 3-4 years, one of the very first questions, without exception, what about private credit? And I say, are you heavily invested in private credit? Yes. And everybody is. And I say, so, what's the argument? And I was giving a speech down in Texas, and the woman before me was from a fund that's very heavily involved in private credit. And she basically gave a sales pitch for private credit, and it's basically a three-pointed sales pitch, none of which of the points really sell me. The first is that it's less volatile. It's a Sharpe ratio argument. So, and it's only, we all know it's only because they don't mark them to market. I mean, everybody knows that. So it's just like private equity. If the S&P 500 goes from 100 to 50, they mark their private equity down 20 points. And then they both recover over time. They both go up to 100. So look at that. They have the same return, but the S&P had double the volatility and then some. That argument is not valid. They aren't marked to market. So, the next argument is somewhat valid. Historical performance. Private credit had some very good years. It was quite cheap, 5 or 7 years ago. And you use a historical argument that the performance is good, and it's true. But as we all know, as they say in the disclaimers at the commercials, past performance is no guarantee of future results. And public credit, I think, has outperformed private credit for a few quarters at least now. So it's already changing. So I think that there's a lot of overinvestment in private credit, and the liquidity is not very good. And I just don't think the excess reward is anything close to what it used to be. So I would view that as a place where there would be forced selling. Harvard could turn into a forced seller. And Harvard, they at least used to have the best reputation. Yale had this great reputation for investing in private markets, and that lured in a lot of Me Too behavior because they were emulating the results of Yale. But once one university is publicly acknowledging that they have liquidity problems, I've got news for you. If you have a cockroach in the kitchen, there's never one cockroach. So there's more. It becomes systemic. It doesn't mean everybody's overinvested and overly locked up. But in 2008, I was raising lots of money for distressed mortgages, the stuff that was defaulting like crazy. And it got to such a price that it was just truly unbelievable. I mean, there were securities that were trading that started life at 100, had never really had much volatility, and they were being liquidated at prices of 30 cents on the dollar. And you could use assumptions that were just nobody believed would happen. You could say 70% of these mortgages default and we recover 30 cents on the dollar, and it's a 24 IRR. And I said this to the Stanford University endowment, the head guy. And I said, I can prove to you that your worst case is going to be a 24 IRR, because I'm going to you tell me what assumptions you think are absurdly punishing, and I'll use them. and you got a 24 IRR. And let me finish. And he says, I can't argue with you. You make a very compelling point, but I can't invest with you. And I said, why? He said, I have no money. We're all locked up. We're getting called because everything's so cheap. Everyone's calling their money now. You know, these are draw funds. Now we're calling your capital. And he said, I can't even make those capital calls. And I said, come on. I really love Stanford Endowment. What a great name for the client list. Give me $10 million. I don't have $10 million. I have no money. These are large endowments. And if they need money, they have to sell. You see, markets, everyone knows markets have fear and greed that drive them. And everyone knows that fear is stronger than greed when it really push comes to shove. But the actual strongest driver of investment behavior is need. Sometimes people need. Back in 1993, interest rates were perceived to be low, and I went to one of my university endowment, it was the treasurer, it was their operating money. And he said, I just met with the president of the university, and he says I have to make 6% for the operating money. And he said, I told him it's impossible to get 6% without tremendous risk because treasury interest rates are at 3%. And he said, wrong answer. You're going to get 6%. Just find out how you're going to do it. And of course, in 1994, interest rates went way up, and everybody that had done that sort of thing, like Orange County, California, there was a very famous default of Orange County, California. And, you know, so there's need is very powerful, but it's bad enough when you make the determination. You say, I have this goal, the 6% goal, I need to make it. I'll give it a shot. But the other side of that is even more powerful. When you're forced to sell. It doesn't matter what the price is. You don't have an option. If you have to sell to pay the bills, what are you going to do?
If you're preparing for that kind of moment, are you sitting mostly in cash, a little gold?
No, no. We manage a lot of other people's money, and a lot of it is in the fixed income market. We're just protecting and waiting for much better opportunities. When I think about it, you know, markets take the stairs up and the elevator down, which means they go up faster than they go down faster than they go up. And so when it really breaks, it's not down a couple of points. Even what we saw in April, that's not a real break of the credit market. A real break of the credit market is bonds drop 30 points. And everyone thinks they're cheap, but they have to sell. So you have an opportunity at some point to buy bonds down, I don't know, let's just say it's 25 points. High yield bonds yield about 2.5% more than treasury bonds. So if it takes 10 years for that 25-point opportunity, you're going to break even. And it's not going to take 10 years. It's not going to take 5 years. I believe, but the panel before me said, I think is true. I think 27, 28 are going to be, are likely to be a window of tremendous opportunity. Because I think by then, the treasury problem will be even more in focus than it is today. And I think that it'll weigh upon market behavior. We need to restructure a lot of things in our system. We need to restructure institutions. We need to restructure political parties. We need to restructure our finances. All these things have been in place. It's the waves of history. You know, Neil Howe calls it the fourth turning. He wrote a book called The Fourth Turning in the mid-90s, predicting the credit crisis around 2006 using demography. Pretty good. And I know him pretty well, and we talk about it, and we have the same concepts, and that is that societies start with a pact. They have an economic system that produces things, and then they have, so that's the means of production, and then they have the property relations that split up the rewards. And when it starts out, and this would be, say, right after World War II or after the Civil War, it starts out that everybody kind of buys into how the system works. But there's a fundamental problem with this kind of duality of property relations and the means of production. Means of production change in revolutionary ways. Steam engine, radio, television, telephone, internet, AI. They're just explosions of innovation. But the property relations, they don't change very quickly. In fact, they're barely evolutionary in the way they change, because over time, this becomes a wealth inequality, which of course we're in an extreme, where the people that benefit from the property relations, they don't want them to change because they're winning. So when you have tremendous concentration of wealth and power, the property relations become calcified. And meanwhile, the means of production are causing all kinds of disruption and intensifying the wealth inequality. And then suddenly the whole thing says, this doesn't work. We have to get the property relations to a right place where this isn't a feudal system, where there's the lords and the serfs. But that's what we have. And so we need to rejigger all of this stuff. So, and the Treasury debt problem, the interest expense unaffordability, is another offshoot of all of this. It's all the same thing. It's that we need institutions that people believe in.
We're almost out of time, and I could speak with you for an hour, but I want to finish with the idea that, is this a United States problem or is this a global problem? Can you hide by going to invest in places like, say, Europe or Japan?
You can hide to a certain extent. I don't think you could become immune. I think the way to invest in periods like this, I think, are to go with long-term themes. And a long-term theme that I think is one of the most bankable, and it might take, in 30 years, this will be a great success. And that is, you should invest in India. Because India has a similar profile today to where China was 35 years ago, when they had tremendous population, labor force, visibility of labor force growth, tremendous problems, a gummed up legal system, corruption all over the place. But those are things that can be fixed. And you see what China went from 1/12 of the US GDP to 70–80% of US GDP, and they certainly produce more goods than the United States, so in a certain sense, they're bigger. Well, India has the same demographic outlook as China did then, and India has a benefit for supply chain being moved around, for manufacturing can come there. They're very technology. They have a long history of being, a significant society. So I don't know how long it's going to take, but that's one that you buy, and you just do yourself a favor and don't open the statement. Because if you do, when there's trouble, you're going to sell it, right? Because it'll be down 30%. So just hold it for your grandchildren's college fund, and that'll work. So there are places to hide, but I think gold is proven to be a source of growth. If you were a Bitcoin person, I would recommend, instead of being a Bitcoin person, you would take the same unit of volatility by buying gold and leveraging it probably twice. See, it's interesting that gold has outperformed Bitcoin year to date, even though Bitcoin's done very well. And for the last 12 months, Bitcoin has outperformed gold, but they're both up 40+%. Those are the places to be. And then dollar-based investors should be investing in foreign currencies. The S&P 500 has stopped outperforming the MSCI Europe, and it's underperforming in a major way on a year-to-date basis. And that took a while to happen, but things always take longer than people think. But it's happening in real time, and the next one will be selected emerging market equities as opposed to the United States, because the emerging markets will have the same benefit broadly as India does most specifically, but you'll also win on the currency translation if you're a dollar-based investor. So we are, for the first time in a long time, starting to introduce foreign currencies into our funds, even ones that are owned by dollar-based investors. We're not all in. We want to see the dollar break through a certain trend line and resistance lines and stuff like that, but we're pretty close.
Jeffrey Gundlach of Double Line Capital, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, everybody.
That's Jeffrey Gundlach of Double Line, in conversation with Lisa Abramowitz at the Bloomberg Global Credit Forum. We'll go back to Lisa for another interview in just a few moments here, but Jeffrey Gundlach talking about the importance of long-term strategic investment, saying that public credit has done better than private credit for him in recent months, and noting that gold is, in his words, no longer for lunatic survivalists. Let's get a check of markets on this Wednesday afternoon with Charlie Pellet. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, David Gura. Indeed, we're looking at a deteriorating situation in the past 30 minutes or so. Stocks now negative, giving up earlier gains. S&P right to the numbers here, down 16, drop there of 0.3%. Dow Industrials down 3 points, just about flat on the day. The S&P, by the way, at 6,022. Nasdaq down 91, drop there of 0.4%. Your 10-year at 4.41%. The 2-year on the CPI Tuesday, 3.94%. Fourth month of surprisingly benign inflation driving bond yields down. We've got spot gold up $16 the ounce, up 0.5% year to date. Gold up 27.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude surging 4.4% today, closing in on $68 a barrel, $67.90 right now on WTI. Bitcoin down 1.1%, 108,000.
Welcome to our TV network, your ultimate destination for all things exciting and essential. From mouth-watering food to the latest in fashion, health, education, music, movies, and news, plus thrilling sports and breathtaking travel. Our TV network brings it all to you. Tune in today and experience the best of every world. All in one place, rtv.network.